across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome back. It is the home of common sense. Lots to get through. We are, of course, discussing many things this afternoon. Labour's failure to tackle the small boat crisis risks fueling more grooming gang cases. According to the Tories, tell us something we didn't know, as the Ministry of Justice data shows a quarter of sex assaults on women last year were committed by foreign nationals. Well, it's not hard to join the dots here, which makes me feed into the wider question here. Will this inquiry, when it eventually comes, lead to real change? We'll have more on that throughout the course of the programme. Also, Iran has warned that any US intervention in its conflict with Israel could spark a full-scale Middle East war, with Donald Trump said to be considering military action after 6 nights of fighting. I thought he wasn't up for that, but maybe things have changed. And MPs have voted to decriminalise women terminating their own pregnancies, marking the biggest change to reproductive rights laws in half a century. This happened with almost no public debate, hardly any Westminster debate, and a swift vote late into the night. We'll have details to come. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Will the grooming gang inquiry lead to real change? We're on probably the third day of discussing this, and we can't and we won't leave this rape gang story alone. It is too big, and it literally needs to be relentlessly kept in check. And we need to get to the real hub of what is going to be asked, and of course what we're really looking for is seismic change. Now, I'm not that kind of hopeful, for one very good reason, which I'll give you in a second. There are so many elements to this. We know thousands of questions. There are individuals currently quaking in their boots, not just perpetrators, but those involved in covering things up. The shredding machines at town halls are probably working overtime, and even those that let things have a free pass because they just weren't good at their job should also be called to question. None of it mattered to many working-class, trashy girls who like to drink and like to party. What was the problem? They were the problem. Not a victim, a problem. That old 1970s line of a girl wearing a short skirt or a low-cut top is probably asking for it was alive and well still in the 2000s. In fact, it's still alive and well now. But the evidence is mounting. And what we need to get to the bottom of are why so many from one cultural or religious background were able to carry out such offences on an industrial scale for so long and absolutely nothing happened. We know that most of these men were of Pakistani origin, most are Muslims, and some are not British. It's not weird, by the way, to look at those factors. You'd be failing spectacularly, you'd be letting every victim down if you didn't look at those factors. We're all aware child abuse, child exploitation, child rape comes in all forms, usually within the family. We know that. It can happen within religious circles. And in this case, it is grooming gangs. So this is a particular element of paedophilia and child sex offences. Why would we not look at that? In the same way that abuse in the Catholic Church delivered some commonality. Most were older white men who used the community of the church as a camouflage and the loyalty of their colleagues as a defence. There are sort of similarities. And the commonality here is nationality, Pakistani, and culture. And that's rather backed up, by the way, in the Louise Casey review, because there was part of that review. We did touch on this just briefly throughout the course of the show that hasn't got quite the airtime that other elements haven't. This is the bit. This is what Casey wrote in the review. She said, during this audit, we noted that a significant proportion of these cases appear to involve suspects who are non-UK nationals and or who are claiming asylum in the UK. A number of live operations, including some of those reported to us by the Met Police Service, report an overlap between child exploitation and child criminal exploitation. So, I mean, let's just let that settle for a second. If you have I don't know, 1,000... Just imagine a fictitious scenario where 2,000 23-year-old men jumped in a boat and crossed the English Channel and arrived in this country. I mean, just imagine that, if that's possible, not just for 1 week, but kind of every week over the course of almost amounting to about 50,000 a year. The mere idea importing people from countries whose values are very, very different and whose experiences and views, particularly on women and girls, are incredibly different. There's no getting away from this. This aspect of sex offences of children is rooted in cultural difference. And there is the uncomfortable area that needs to be exploited. It's that specific point that we cannot shy away from. We can't any longer say, no, 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 no. Because you hear it all the time. You know, I've heard the good and the great from mate list downwards or upwards. So, you know, no, but most paedophilia, right, is happening in the home. And that will be mostly white people. Yes, and that is a very specific area of sexual offences against children. This is another area. And obviously rooting out individuals who carry out offences, usually against their own children or somebody in the family, is equally as important. But like any form of criminality, there are different strands to it. Uncomfortable to talk in quite sort of clinical terminology here, but that is the reality. And this is a grooming gang aspect of child sex offences. So on the left, if you are constantly shouting at your radio and television, go, why are they mentioning the people's background? Well, because it's relevant, and it's very relevant to this. And if this inquiry does not throw that up, then it's a failed inquiry. Because this is where we genuinely have an issue of multiculturalism. And if you didn't think that was the case, it's rather compounded by the enormity of the wider community, not just, quote, their own, but others in councils and children's services and education and goodness knows where else, who refuse to acknowledge that. Each time it was raised, the same thing came back. More paedophiles are white. Right. Firstly, it ain't a competition, kids. Secondly, that isn't what we're talking about here. We're talking about grooming gangs and why, en masse, groups of men from a certain background, Pakistani heritage, mostly Muslim, some foreign, mostly found it to be completely okay to act in this sort of way. That white girls were beneath them, that white girls were here for this reason, that they had no kind of their own culture. You know, if you invite somebody from the third world who's never seen an ankle in their life, and then suddenly they come to the West, then you do have to sort of think, well, hang on a second, this could get quite dangerous because we are importing a culture that has very different ideas and values. 0344 499 1000. Will this inquiry lead to real change? Because what it has to acknowledge, this would be my 2 quids worth into this debate, what it has to acknowledge is that there is a cultural component, a big cultural component to this discussion. And let's talk about this and the other big stories of the day. Chloe Dobbs, political commentator, is back with us. Afternoon to you, Chloe.
Afternoon, Ian.
Well, let's have a little look then on this particular story. Keir Starmer defending his decision to hold a national inquiry into grooming gangs, of course. We now know that. But previously accusing people who did call for an inquiry into grooming gangs of jumping on the far-right bandwagon. Let's have a listen to what he had to say, though, just yesterday.
This inquiry, in direct answer to your question, must go where the evidence takes it, and I'll be absolutely clear about that. And if that's questions of ethnicity, that's questions of the role of public officials, if it's questions of assumptions that were made that shouldn't have been made, all of that needs to be uncovered. No stone will be left unturned here.
Right, there it is. He's literally said in that first answer, if that includes ethnicity, exactly the point that I was making. It doesn't, by the way, that mean, I shouldn't have to say this, Chloe, that everyone of that ethnicity is therefore, you know, exactly the same. Anyone with a half a brain cell knows that. But we are dealing with a commonality here, and we are clearly now, as a result of Casey, we can look at this and say, hang on, so there's also 1 in 4 sex offenders are foreign nationals. There's a picture being joined together here, and it's crucial that that element of this, Chloe, doesn't get forgotten.
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial that we explore that element, and specifically I think a lot of people are confused. Why is it specifically Pakistanis? We know a lot of people come to this country from backwards cultures. I was just looking at some of the latest stats on who is most predominantly coming across on small boats, because you spoke about the asylum link there. It's predominantly the most common group is Afghans at the moment. Why is it the case that this specific type of crime is one country? And I think specifically people from Mirpur, where they're of course trying to build another airport at the moment. Why is it specifically that region? That's something that has to be explored. I think Keir Starmer, he's refusing to apologise when he really does need to. We've just had Angela Rayner also standing in for him at PMQs, asked by Chris Philp to apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for that far-right bandwagon comment. No apology whatsoever. He's pretending now like he has been the strong man on this all along, saying, oh, I did all of this stuff when I was Director of Prosecutions at the CPS, and now, of course, I'm doing everything that we need to on the grooming gangs. It's like, hang on, it's taken us since January, victims across the country crying out, begging you for a national inquiry, and then you dismissing those calls as a far-right bandwagon. It's taken you he's essentially been forced by this report by Louise Casey to finally allow us to have a national inquiry. He really should apologise, and he hasn't done. But, you know, at least we've got this inquiry on the way now.
What's interesting is that when you start to dig and you look at some of the stories, and this came out as well, Casey's review commended efforts to analyse perpetrators' mindset as a way to understand any potential cultural drivers of offending. 2 years later, it emerged that Police Scotland had disrupted a large grooming gang made up of asylum seekers in Glasgow, but they kept the operation secret. Well, they kept it secret, for goodness sake. A report on the case, which was uncovered by a newspaper, showed that the gang of at least 46 men preyed on at least 44 vulnerable girls. Some of the victims were abused by more than 20 men. The suspects reportedly came from the Kurdish, Afghani, Egyptian, Moroccan, Turkish, Pakistani or Iraqi communities. Police Scotland did not publicise the 2016 operation, and although the force said 19 members were reported to the Crown Office, it is unknown how many were convicted. This is a perfect example, Chloe, of everything that is wrong. This is a cover-up.
Yeah, the cover-up has continued for years and years. It's not just the case that this was in the early 2000s that there has been a cover-up. I think the fact that there has been so much resistance from people like Starmer to have a national inquiry since January, whilst everyone's been crying out for it, I think that still shows that we've got this issue of politicians and officials wanting to brush this under the carpet. You get a lot of people, famously Emily Maitlis with her crazy comments to Rupert Loeb, saying it's not majority Pakistani men, it's majority white people. You're just saying that this is a problem because you're racist. Now, first of all, we know regardless of where, it depends what period of time you look at, what study you look at, what stats you get. In some of them you will get the majority as white, but Pakistanis are massively overrepresented, or if you look at something else you might see Pakistanis are the majority. Regardless, the reason why we are concerned about specifically Pakistani men committing these crimes is not because we're racist and we don't care about white people abusing children. It's because it's specifically when it is Pakistani men, or in the case you've just mentioned, asylum seekers, that there is this huge concern about upsetting, community tensions, as they say, where there has been a cover-up. When it's white people commit the crimes, the authorities are much more willing to get involved. We had fairly recently, there was another case in Scotland of a white grooming gang that did some absolutely horrific things. They were all convicted and given long sentences. And a lot of people looked at that and went, look, it's not all just Pakistanis, it's white people. It's like, yes, but they were very willing to take action on that white gang. Why is it the case that when it is people who are foreign who have committed the crimes that we're all terrified to do anything about it, and we have to, hide these investigations from the public eye? We've had, of course, as you mentioned, there's this mention in this report of potentially asylum seekers being involved. I expect Keir Starmer and others are probably quite worried about that point, because they're thinking, well, look at what happened last year. There was the rumour that Axel Ruder-Cabana was someone who came on a boat and we had all those riots. Are we going to get a load of riots again if there is a clear link between asylum seekers who have come here illegally and these crimes?
So you have a Prime Minister who, and we just played the little clip of Starmer, who is acknowledging all the different elements that have to be looked at. He's just had a damning report land on his desk just 5 days ago, to the point that he's had to do a U-turn on something that he described as being the territory of far-right bigots, and anyone who wants to subscribe to it is jumping on the far-right bandwagon. While simultaneously, the same man is presiding over a system that so far this week has led about 1,500 people, mostly young men, average age 23, into this country. I mean, if you put that in an episode of The West Wing or The Thick of It, people would go, well, that's ridiculous. Come on, that would never happen by anyone's standards. Here we are.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that Keir Starmer genuinely cares about this issue. As I said, I think that he very much was forced into this national inquiry. He resisted it best he could, and now he's essentially been forced by this report. And you mentioned it at the beginning of your monologue. Will an inquiry actually lead to meaningful change? And it will probably lead to change in that authorities will hopefully, or at least to some degree, stop covering up these crimes when they occur. But will action be taken from an immigration perspective to stop people from coming to this country who have a higher propensity to commit these sort of crimes? I highly doubt it. And I don't think that people of Keir Starmer's ideology are going to be really willing to accept the link between immigration and this problem and many other problems happening in this country with other crimes.
Indeed, and just a culturally different mindset that exists in some people from some communities. Chloe, stay with us. We've got more to come. Of course, we'll talk about Trump and what the heck is happening in the Middle East. This is it's already a fairly worrying story, let's face it. This is moving into really disturbing territory. We'll have details on that as well. Over to you too, 0344 499 1000. The new Reform MP, Sarah Poin, is going to join us in around about 10 minutes' time. Also, a couple of interesting writers who've written on the grooming gang issue as well will be with us. And if you want to get in touch, 87222 for a message, or of course 0344 499 1000. You can call us there or leave us a voice note there too. Right now, 1:20 this is Talk.
You can't try and snipe at the Conservatives for things that weren't our fault.
Oh, I mean, I
This
haven't
is
got
not one.
time. Don't tell your big mate Donald Trump to tell his big mate Vladimir Putin to stop killing people, then we can solve that problem like that.
Won't be surprised to know I disagree.
Why do you disagree, though? Why do you want our young people left on the scrap heap? The court's time being wasted, laying down a ruling on what is a woman. You and I have been speaking for far too many years about
And
this.
actually, you know, I'm very grateful to you too, because you have always covered this topic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This
It is Talk 0344 499 1000. Chloe Dobbs is with us, looking at the big stories of the day. They don't get any bigger than this, Chloe. Disturbing things going on in the Middle East. Iran's supreme leader has vowed to never surrender against Donald Trump's America. And Mr. Trump did post on his own social media, "surrender now," or something to that effect. Let's have a listen to what the president said just yesterday while on board Air Force One.
Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. We don't have to go too deep into it. They just can't have a nuclear weapon.
There's reports that you want to send the Vice President and Steve Witkoff to meet with the Iranians and have discussions. Is that something you're considering?
Not sure yet. I may. Depends on what happens when I get back.
What specifically is better than a ceasefire? What are you looking for here?
An end. A real end, not a ceasefire. An end.
Not a ceasefire, an end. What does he mean by that, Chloe? I mean, there's some disturbing language floating around, and you don't need a PhD in foreign affairs to know that this is very dangerous.
This is quite a serious situation, but I think that Israel absolutely needs to do what it needs to do to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. A lot of people are saying, oh, you know, why has Israel done this? They're essentially starting World War III. But if anything, they are preventing it, because if Iran has a nuclear weapon and they use that, say, against Israel, America will be obliged to respond. We do not want a huge nuclear war and humanity, or at least a lot of it, being wiped out. And that's why Trump there is saying, you know, we don't want a ceasefire. We don't want people to just, you know, have a hug and say, oh, we'll stop firing some missiles for a bit whilst Iran continues to build a nuclear weapon. And you know, make no mistake, the mission of the Islamic Republic of Iran is to destroy Israel. Yeah. It's like in their ideology, they think that the last prophet will emerge once Israel is wiped off the map. They chant death to America, death to Europe. Right? These people are very clear. These are not the people who you kindly negotiate a ceasefire with. We'll see what's going to happen over the coming hours and days, but Trump has essentially given them a 24 to 48 hour warning to just, you know, give up and hand over Iran. And I really hope that that is what happens, because the Iranians do not want these Islamists in charge. You've seen people already on the streets of Iran celebrating, so many videos going around of girls now having the confidence to go out and let their hair down and sing and dance in the streets, something that they would normally be imprisoned and tortured for. This would be a huge win for the people of Iran. A war is always scary because it involves people dying, very sadly, and you don't know what it's going to escalate to. But I do think that what Israel has done, as much as many people don't want to openly admit, is a good thing. No,
I'd like to thank Israel, frankly. I think they are helping make the world a safer place. And, you know, if countries like Iran or the regime of Iran are wiped off the face of the earth, good. You know, let's hope it gets to that place. And, you know, a scintilla, you know, previously, see the Shah for details. I mean, there has been a semblance of peace in Iran, and then, of course, it all went pear-shaped again. But look, we watch with interest, and, you know, we hope it doesn't develop into something that involves multiple losses of life. And it can, as Trump said, not just a ceasefire, but can actually come to an end. We will wait and see. Also this that feeds into kind of our first story, really. Countries refusing to take back migrants who arrive illegally in the UK could be stripped of visas under new plans being scrutinised by Keir Starmer. Don't hold your breath. Let's have a listen to Nigel Farage. He was on with us on Talk this morning with Mike, talking about foreign criminals being deported. Here he is.
It's about foreign criminals in British prisons not being deported, even though they want to be.
They want to be.
Well, let's say you're from Lithuania.
Yeah.
And you've been given a 15-year prison sentence. Yeah. At least if you go back to Lithuania to serve the time, your mum can come and see you. Yeah. We're not, even though people want to be deported, they're not being deported. The idea that we don't have as big a shortage of prison places as you think if we get rid of the foreign criminals, and we're just not doing it.
Yeah, so Keir Starmer wants to strip visas, apparently, Chloe. I mean, my sense on this is it's one of those stories we'll hear nothing of again.
Yeah, I think that this is just moral posturing, shall we say, by Keir Starmer to say, look, I'm doing something, when actually he doesn't have the tenacity to do something serious. Giving countries consequences for refusing to take people back is a good idea. But I am slightly sceptical as to how well this would work, because if it is the case that people from a country know that there is no possible legal route to the UK, there's no possible visa option, there's no way that they can up their skills and show they'll be a productive member of the economy to try and come legally, and their only option to get to Britain if they want here is to come on a boat, maybe you'll see an uptick in people trying to get here, and it doesn't actually make that much difference. But let's see. On that point of prisons that Nigel was talking about, I saw that earlier. He's talking about apparently a big story is going to drop next week about what is happening. And as he said there, you've got people who actually want to be deported who can't be deported. This should be a top priority. 100%. This should be a top priority for Shabana Mahmood. And she's spoken about it at the Dispatch box a few times, saying, oh, yes, we're working on it to get these foreign criminals out. But I mean, Labour, you've been in power for a year. They're talking now about, oh, we've had our spending review, and I think they said they're going to make about 4,000 and something new prison spaces. But as Nigel was saying when speaking to Mike, we've got 12,000 foreign criminals in the prisons. Surely that is an easy way to make a whole load of extra capacity in the prisons, but they just don't have any brain cells, I guess.
You would think so. But listen, the brain cell thing is probably nearer to reality than anything, Chloe. On that point, thank you, Chloe Dobbs, political commentator with us on the programme. Thank you to her. Over to you shortly, 0344 499 1000. We are going to be speaking with Sarah Poin, the Reform UK MP. Also, Lara Brown, commissioning editor at The Spectator, is with us. Lisa McKenzie, the academic and author. Really interesting piece that she's written for Spiked Online about academia and how that could be almost feeding part of the cover-up that we have talked about with the grooming gangs. Again, something we all suspected. Details of that on the way, and over to you as well, 0344 499 1000.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Just gone 1:03444991,000. There's a lot to get through this afternoon. We're asking that question as well. Will this inquiry, this grooming gang, rape gang inquiry, lead to meaningful change? And that's really key to this, isn't it? You know, everyone right now is preening their virtuous whiskers, including Keir Starmer, which is, frankly, a rather extraordinary thing to see, bearing in mind what he said about people that supported an inquiry half an hour ago. He's changed his tone on this. But are we going to... What sort of result are we looking at here? What do we need to see? The Tories say Labour's failure on small boats risks fueling more grooming gang cases, and there is some evidence, certainly in the Casey review, of that. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp highlighted Louise Casey's report, warning that many suspects are asylum seekers or foreign nationals. Again, we did have a sense that that was already the case, but once again, it was resisted at every level. Ministry of Justice data also shows a quarter of sex assaults on women last year were committed by foreign nationals. Shortly we'll be speaking with Lisa McKenzie, academic and author. Also Lara Brown's going to be with us, commissioning editor at The Spectator, who's written a really interesting piece in this area. First, Sarah Poin MP, Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Sarah, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure. You've had a bit of a baptism of fire, haven't you, since you pitched up down there on the green benches. You've seen a couple of, complete U-turns by the government, the likes of which people who've been in Parliament for 30 years haven't seen U-turns quite this spectacular. And, of course, the latest one is particularly irksome, yes, because, of course, it came from a man that told us that if you're looking for an inquiry, you're jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Reform UK, Nigel and others have been agitating for this for a long time and talking about the detail. Suddenly, Keir Starmer's gone, yep, let's do one then.
Well, how shameful that this government has needed this report from Baroness Casey, which literally has now dragged the government kicking and screaming to the point where it knows the British people will not accept anything less than a full statutory investigation into this. But also how shameful that in 2012, Maggie Oliver, who I'm sure we all know has been campaigning on this and knows this subject inside out, she resigned then because of what she'd found, because of wanting action. And she's made it quite clear that the issues that we should have been investigating all that time ago are still the same issues that have been raised in this report by Baroness Casey.
Yeah, and there is the thing, and it's not as if it's a hint at these issues. I mean, this is glaring stuff, right? I mean, this is, anyone can see this. Wow, literally the kind of stuff that yourself, your party, here on Talk and places where I've worked for years, things we've been saying that were kind of either ignored or, and as we now know, in some cases, overtly hidden away.
Absolutely. We have been called racists, far right, for really speaking the truth. The truth of the matter is, and Baroness Casey's report has only confirmed that, the predominant culprits in these cases are British Pakistani men, and the predominant victims are white girls, young girls, and the persistent rape of these girls and abuse has been allowed to go on and continue because authorities, people in authority, whether that's the police, the councils, including the social workers and so on, and I imagine when this really comes out, members of the government have decided that they'd rather not risk being called a racist than to actually protect these victims that were so badly being abused.
What's been interesting about Reform UK being in Parliament, punching well above your weight, and I say that kindly given that there's 5 of you and, you're up against a government with a massive majority, but always getting out what appears to be some really, really strong issues. I assume, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Sarah, but that you will keep the pressure up on this.
Absolutely. What needs to happen is that this can't be an inquiry like the blood scandal or the post office inquiry that has been just kicked and kicked and kicked into the long grass. This inquiry has to have a time scale on it, and it has to hold those people to account that have been so complicit in allowing the prolonged abuse of these victims. And let's not forget, these victims are children. In a lot of cases, they're children.
100%.
And they've suffered multiple, rape and abuse, and they have been ignored by the authorities. So yes, I will 100% be keeping the pressure up as much as I can. And also, there's other issues. It's not just about the historic abuse. It's about what's going on now. This is still going on. Anyone that says otherwise is in denial. And not only that, we know from the report you mentioned that's recently come out from the Centre for Migration Control, I was just checking the name there, but we know that foreign nationals account now for a quarter of all rape convictions in this country. Now, we also know that daily we're getting 900, 1,000 illegal immigrants, foreign nationals, coming across our shores. And they're no longer in small boats. These are big boats carrying 70 passengers. So what is the government doing to stop that? Well, we know the answer, absolutely nothing. But the point is women's safety, because of the statistic I've just given you, is increasingly at risk from this government. So it's about dealing with the live problems, the current problems with these grooming gangs, with the abuse of women that is ongoing. It's not just about hysterical stuff.
Yeah, indeed, and it's jarring to hear a Prime Minister say, "Yep, no stone left unturned," while simultaneously being the man in charge of allowing 717 people in the last few days to just simply enter the country by jumping on a boat. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Listen, Sarah, glad to hear that you're going to be keeping the pressure up on this. Thank you for joining us. She's Sarah Poching, MP, the Reform UK MP for Runcorn and Helsby. Let's speak with Lara Brown, commissioning editor over there at The Spectator. Lara, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Nice to have you on. Interesting headline in your latest piece. A grooming gang inquiry will expose Labour's guilty men. And, we've long suspected this isn't just about perpetrators of the crime. It's those that allowed it by saying very little. And in some cases, I think we can go as far as to say actively covering things up.
Yeah. So I think the important thing here is not to get too excited about this inquiry. A good, proper inquiry will look at what was undeniably a cover-up. If we go through independent inquiries we've had in local towns, we see over and over again examples of girls being turned away from the police when they said they were being groomed, of girls being dismissed as child prostitutes, rather than victims of rape. There's a horrifying account from one victim whose father went to try and rescue her from being groomed and found himself in prison. There were girls who were forced to do drugs and were criminalised when their groomers got off scot-free. And a proper inquiry needs to look at the role that those people played, not just the role of groomers. I want to see every perpetrator in prison. Foreign nationals should be deported, but we can't let it stop there. There are too many people who held positions of power, who had safeguarding responsibilities and who got off scot-free. And my article focused on one particular case, which is really horrifying, but I think not rare. And it shows how we just can't trust Labour on this. So on Monday, Sean Davies, who is now the MP for Telford, he became the MP for Telford in 2024 at the election, got up and said that Telford didn't have a statutory inquiry because the then Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, and the then local government minister, Rishi Sunak, refused to provide a statutory inquiry. And just quickly, a statutory inquiry is done under the Inquiries Act. It has statutory powers, so you can compel witnesses to come forward. So someone doesn't want to speak to the inquiry, they're forced to. An independent inquiry has no such powers, and Telford had an independent inquiry run by a KC. Sean Davies didn't mention his role in the cover-up, in his role in preventing an inquiry from happening, which I just thought was completely sickening. So in 2016, the Conservative MP for Telford, Lucy Allen, she became the MP a year before. She was the first Telford MP to ever talk about grooming gangs, to ever call for an inquiry. She stood up in Parliament and she asked for a statutory inquiry into what happened in Telford. She'd met with victims, she wanted justice. Sean Davies, who is leader of Telford and Wrekin Council at this time, immediately then signs a letter to Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, saying that we do not feel at this time a further inquiry is necessary. And there has been no inquiry already. There'd been an Ofsted report. There was a chance that XJ might go to Telford, but they had no reason to think that would happen. It didn't happen. So he actively wrote a letter to the Home Secretary saying we shouldn't have an inquiry. And what did Labour do after this happened? Labour selected him to be the MP. I mean, I think that shows that we cannot trust Keir Starmer.
It didn't just become an MP, he sits on the Home Affairs Committee just to make it even more dubious, and it would be laughable if it wasn't in any other setting than this.
I mean, it's really terrifying, actually, because the Home Affairs Select Committee is a select committee responsible for scrutinising the inquiry into grooming gangs when it happens. And a man involved in a cover-up who has fought against victims' campaign to get justice is now going to be part of that scrutiny committee.
Yeah. I mean, again, it is utterly shocking, but it does, you know, rather feed into the sort of overarching area we've been looking at in the last few days, and particularly today on this, and that is this lack of transparency. And when you were just uttering the words, I was familiar with this story, and you've written it brilliantly and in a very digestible and powerful way, which is great. But I sense there's probably many more of these kind of cases as well. But the idea that somebody would come to you and say, should we have an inquiry into young girls, children, who were on an industrial scale, sexually assaulted, raped, then there's all the other stuff, you know, giving drugs and alcohol, kidnap, trafficking, all of that. Should we have an inquiry into this? The idea that you would sit at your desk and go, nah. I mean, it's almost beyond belief that somebody would say no to that question.
It's unforgivable. It's the most sickening abuse of public office I can imagine. Victims across Telford went to people in power saying, look at what happened to me. I was kidnapped for days at a time. I was forced to sleep with hundreds of men. I was first groomed aged 10 in primary school. I was forced to take heroin. I mean, the stories are really harrowing. I imagine I can't see them on TV. They're horrific. And there is no way that Sean Davies wasn't aware of these stories. They were in the papers. I imagine that he met victims, and yet he chose to bury his hand in the sand and fight against an inquiry. He didn't want to know what happened. He was scared of the implications. I imagine that he was scared of stirring up community tensions or being accused of racism, but it's unforgivable. And I cannot forgive a party that makes that mad an MP.
100%. And whether he specifically, you know, didn't sign papers or didn't listen or whatever, the fact is, it seems to me, Lara, that there's a certain type of politician, mostly Labour politicians, somebody perhaps like him. It just isn't in their DNA to want to kind of go there, if that makes sense. They're like everything, it's like a magnetic pole kind of resisting another. They can't quite make that step to either acknowledging or certainly publicly acknowledging the reality of what's in front of them, because their own political DNA doesn't really allow it.
So, yeah, Sean Davies is not a unique example. I'm sure you've seen the video of the leader of Oldham Council saying that girls' lives weren't ruined by being
it's a beautiful one, that, wasn't it? I mean, it also sits there in the... If there were BAFTAs for this stuff, I mean, that would certainly be an award winner in one category.
Yes, and you find, in my experience of having worked on this and written on this, grooming catastrophes tend to happen more on Labour-run councils. I haven't got a stat, but that seems to be a pattern that bears out. So that's why Labour's so scared. But also, this tragedy, which has been going on an industrial scale since the 1970s, reveals uncomfortable truths about our societies. Every review I've seen of it that has credible data finds that there is an ethnic pattern, finds that there is a religious undertone to these. There are victims who have said that they were told that they were easy meat because they were here to white girls, one victim was told. There's clearly an ethnic element to this crime. And people who want to believe in the success story of integration or want to push for mass migration on the scale we've seen for the last 20 years do not want to cover this story. And what's happened is we have sold out little girls for political messaging.
Yeah. 100%. Listen, Lara, I urge people to read your piece in The Spectator. Thank you for being with us. Lara Brown, commissioning editor at The Spectator. Let's speak to Lisa McKenzie, academic and author, who's also written a piece on this for Spiked Online, but a different angle, a really powerful one, and one that I think we've scratched our heads on for a long time. Lisa, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. I mean, this is all about how many tiers there are to this story. There are many. There is the law enforcement, there's education, children's services, politicians. And the area that you've picked up on is that troubling, can we call it a barrier? Do we call it burying bad news? Whatever we want to look at it at. The worrying world of academia.
Yes. Well, I mean, I would call it more than that. It's actually poor research.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm an academic. I do research. I write research. I engage in research. And what we are supposed to do, especially in the social sciences, we're supposed to speak truth to power. Now, what has happened over the last, I don't know, perhaps 15, 20 years is that ideas around racism and anti-racism as sort of, it's been more important to sort of focus on those ideas rather than actually do perhaps good research.
Yeah.
And I think, just like every other area in this terrible, terrible story and case, is that everyone has been concerned or worried about sort of speaking a truth or even acknowledging a truth, actually.
Yeah.
The academic world has also done this. I've experienced this myself. I've done research and written research that has actually been slated, and I've had other academics sort of threatening me, that I needed to be thrown out of the academic world for saying very sort of simple things that, in 2007, I did research in a council estate in Nottingham, and women were telling me there that there was a group of Iraqi refugees that were constantly sexually harassing them every day, always when they went to the shops. And I wrote that in my PhD. The PhD passed. It was a lauded piece of work, actually, a good piece of work. And then about 2015, I think the politics started to change. And actually, just by me saying that these women had said this automatically made me racist for saying it.
Wow.
But also the women in my research racist for experiencing it. And so I've been on this journey actually with academics for a long time.
Yeah.
And one of the worrying things about this is academics and academic research is often referred to by policy and also by policy makers. We are invited into Parliament as experts. And if you were to look at the academic research around Pakistani grooming gangs, the only academic research you will find is research on how Muslim men are being racialized through the lens and how actually this is Islamophobic. And there is very little evidence, there's very little research about the girls, the victims, but there is a lot of research out there about the perpetrators.
Yeah. Do you think, Lara, is it sort of in a similar ballpark to, as I was talking to Lara, our previous guest, about how it's not in some people's DNA? If you look at sort of academics, I'm always sort of reminded of the archetypal lecturer, only a man with a messy beard and a corduroy jacket can mount some kind of defence of what a nice man Stalin was, but they're able to sort of do it. And is it kind of in that ballpark that these people are, perhaps disproportionately, not all, clearly not all, but disproportionately of a certain political persuasion where they can't quite go there? They're even with all their impressive PhDs and degrees, they just can't make that leap.
It's more than that, actually. It's about academics being disconnected from the bottom of society. Because let's be honest, where this sort of thing has happened, where grooming gangs happen, it's amongst very poor working class communities. So it's about academics being disconnected from those communities. But it's also more about this sort of academics or academic research as sort of activism. And so therefore their ideas about anti-racism has sort of got muddled up with the ideas of telling the truth or speaking truth to power. Because what they think is if you acknowledge something like that this particular group of men, Pakistani men, coming from a particular part of Pakistan, living in parts of the country, there has been, where there are deep inequalities, that speaking that truth is somehow racist. Because anti-racism to them is about not speaking about any of that. And this is unfortunately what has happened. I hope that those who are going to do these reports and are going to look into these cases, I hope that they also look at the academic research on this as well.
It's a great point as well, and I think you just said it there. I think a lot of that area, and I include politicians as well in this, there's a sort of Venn diagram where many of these characters all meet, don't really know what working class is. I think that's quite, you write a lot about working class women. My area of interest is working class men. Between the two of us, we could write a right old blockbuster, I'm pretty sure, on that one, Lisa. So it's that area that so many people just know nothing about, and I think that's clearly a troubling fact, more than a troubling, disturbing factor in all this. Listen, Lisa, we will speak again. It's been brilliant to have you on and hear your story and what you uncovered from this, not understanding the background of the girls and simply not wanting to understand the accusations against the perpetrators. That was Lisa McKenzie. Great guests on this one so far. We've got great calls on the way too. 0344 499 1000.
You can't try and snipe at the Conservatives for things that weren't our fault.
Oh, I mean, I haven't got time. Don't tell your big mate Donald Trump to tell his big mate Vladimir Putin to stop killing people, then we can solve that problem like that.
Won't be surprised to know I disagree.
Why? Why do you disagree, though? Why do you want our young people left on the scrap heap? The court's time being wasted, laying down a ruling on what is a woman. You and I have been speaking for far too many years about this.
And actually, I'm very grateful to you too, because you have always covered this topic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Go to your calls. Steve's in Leeds on the issue of rape gangs. Steve, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. I called earlier and spoke to one of your people, and I was saying that this inquiry needs to actually bring forward the leaders of the Muslim communities in this area and ask them what they're going to do to change the cultural attitudes of these men. Because unless you do that, all you're going to do is police the situation, because it's going to keep happening. I mean, remember, and this is something that hasn't been said before, it might be that hundreds of Pakistani Muslim men were in the rape gangs, but thousands upon thousands of men paid to have sex with these young girls, and they've never been prosecuted. I've never seen a single prosecution of anybody who went to one of these houses and had sex with these girls. I've never seen the Muslim Council of Britain come out and denounce it. And bear in mind, this tars all Muslims. If I was a Muslim, I'd want the Muslim community to come out and say, not in my name.
Yeah, and I understand, you know, I think we all know that the average Muslim, you know, your doctor, I'm being sort of typical here, those that, you know, own shops, etc., that you might come across, somebody works in a bank, you know, I don't think for 1 second would have a different view to you or I on this one. We all get that, but what we have here is a disproportionate amount of men of that background who clearly are up to their necks in it. Very few have gone to jail, and it's a disproportionate number, and it's there for all to see. And you're right, all sectors of the community need to come out. I guess the question is the focus on someone's religion or their nationality, albeit in this case usually the same thing?
Bear in mind, if anything happens in a Muslim country anywhere in the world, Muslims in this country go on the streets and have demonstrations. It's happened for the last 6 months over Palestine every weekend. I live in Batley. One teacher shows some images of the Prophet. 200 people were outside his school within an hour.
100%. 100%.
Community really feels.
It's a great point. It's a great point. The Batley comparison is a great point. I mean, we've banged on about this for a long time, Batley and the school teacher who sadly is in hiding for the rest of his life because he might be killed because of what he did in the classroom. And you're right, there were people outside the school chanting for this man's death or imprisonment at best. So yes, that area is very mobilised in certain issues, but clearly not so much this one. Steve, I've got to move because the news is literally upon us. Thank you for that. We've got some great messages coming through as well. We're going to come back to those too. Kevin Schofield's going to join us from the HuffPost, talk about PMQs and what's been going on there. More comment from you. We'll also talk, as we referenced in the last section, to the Centre for Migration Control, reference that correlation between asylum seekers and sex offenders and grooming gangs. There's a lot to get through. It's your views that absolutely matter most at this end. 0344 499 1000. If you're messaging, it's 87222. We'll get through as many of those as we possibly can. Stand by for all of that. All coming up in just a couple of moments right here at the home of common sense. News now at 2 o'clock on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yeah, welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. Lots to get through here. Labour's failure to tackle the small boat crisis risks fueling more grooming gang cases, according to the Conservatives, as Ministry of Justice data shows over a quarter of sexual assaults on women last year were committed by foreign nationals. That's a powerful figure. How does that square with allowing, well, so far this week alone, 717 people to cross the channel when you don't know who the heck they are? We'll have more on that. Also, PM Keir Starmer will chair an emergency Cobra meeting this afternoon to discuss the Middle East crisis, with Iran warning that US involvement could trigger a full-scale war. There's no doubt about it. This is pretty dicey territory we're on right now. Trump's made his views known. Who blinks next? And police have admitted they failed 19-year-old Harry Dunn after allowing the American woman who killed him while driving on the wrong side of the road to leave the UK under diplomatic immunity. A disturbing story. We've covered this many times over the years when many places were not really talking about it. We'll speak to the representative from Harry Dunn's family shortly on the programme. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. And as if all of that isn't exciting enough, guess who's... Oh, no, sorry, it's Kevin Schofield. I was looking at the wrong page, Kevin. How are you?
I'm very well, Ian. How are you?
Kevin Schofield is, of course, the editor at HuffPost. I nearly called you deputy editor.
I'm political editor.
The political editor at HuffPost. I got it all wrong again, despite saying this same line every week for the last year. Kevin, good to see you.
Good to see you.
And, of course, you joined us on a day when neither Keir Starmer nor Kemi Badenoch were at PMQs, because when the PM's off, so is the leader of the opposition.
Yes.
So we had some deputies. So who was head boy and head girl today?
So it was Angela Rayner, as expected, for Labour, because she's a Deputy Prime Minister.
Yep.
Kemi Badenoch's doing a slightly different thing. It's a sort of squad rotation system she's got going. Right. So the last time this happened, it was Alex Burghart, who's the shadow Duchy of Lancaster. Yep. And today it was Chris Philp, who's the shadow Home Secretary.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought he did okay, actually. He's quite an excitable guy, and I just wondered whether he would be able to handle that bear pit. But he handled it pretty well. He was in pretty strong territory. He went on the grooming gangs report, as you might imagine, tying it to immigration, accusing Labour of a cover-up, and being dragged kicking and screaming to agreeing to a national inquiry, which is true, as we know, consistently for the last 6 months. The government have said we don't need a national inquiry, and lo and behold, now we suddenly do.
Not just that we don't need one, but those calling for one are jumping on a far-right bandwagon. And, that's not even a paraphrasing. I mean, that's literally what he said.
Yeah, I mean, it was a foolish thing.
This kind of beats the winter fuel allowance U-turn.
It does.
In U-turns, in many respects.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track, actually, of all the U-turns.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. That was a foolish thing to say. Now he defends himself by saying, well, he was talking about politicians rather than ordinary people wanting a national inquiry. But when you're splitting hairs, when you're getting into an argument about what you meant, then you're usually losing.
But even there, there are some politicians. They're not all on the right. I mean, for God's sake, it was a Labour politician back in 2002 that first raised this issue in Ankara. It's not. So, I mean, I know it can divide up on party lines, and maybe in some of those local authorities we will see that borne out, but in this inquiry. But it was just a clumsy thing to say. But now, of course, he's changed his mind. And the last interview he gave on it, he said, "No stone unturned. We're going to get to everything. Ethnicity. We're going to do the whole thing." It's like, hang on a second, you've gone further than Farage now. So what's going on now, Keir?
Yeah, I think he's trying to overcompensate for dragging his heels. Initially, I think his thinking back then was probably he didn't want to give a win to the Conservatives, to Elon Musk, who, if you remember, was really kicking off about it at the time. Nigel Farage, he just thought through the lens of a politician, I can't give them a win, I can't back down, I've got to stick to the line. And now, he thought he'd kicked it into the long grass by getting Louise Casey to carry out the investigation. And when she came back and said, look, we're going to have a national inquiry, he had no option, he had to... He had to.
Do you think so? At that point, he would have not really had much of a knowledge of what was in the Casey report, he would have seen it, before. I think it was Saturday he made the announcement, didn't he, about the inquiry. So he may have seen it a couple of days before then.
Yeah.
But up to that point, he can't have known what was in it, or even roughly how this was going to manifest, because otherwise he wouldn't have been saying what he was saying.
Well, no, exactly. I think it only started to leak a few days before publication. So it was published on Monday. There was already a story, I think, kicking around on Friday evening, Saturday morning, that she was going to call for a national inquiry. Keir Starmer was in the air on his way to Canada, with a press pack with him, during which time he told them that's when we're going to have this national inquiry. So that was him trying to get ahead of the actual announcement on Monday, so that they weren't blindsided by it.
What did we hear from the government benches from Angela Rayner on what was going on with Israel and Iran? Because there's a sense that there's not been a lot from our government on this so far, bearing in mind what's at stake here.
Yeah.
It affects everybody.
Well, it does. And, I mean, their line all along has been de-escalation, which, fair enough, no one wants to see the situation get any worse.
Yeah.
But it looks like it's almost inevitable that it's going to. Israel have already said, look, we won't de-escalate until Iran no longer has the capability to build a nuclear weapon. The noises coming out of the White House, or at least coming out of Donald Trump's Truth Social account, would suggest that it looks as though America are going to join this bombing campaign in some way. I don't think a final decision has been made yet, but certainly that looks as the way that it's going. You've had Donald Trump calling for unconditional surrender, ruling out a ceasefire. He wants it to end, and it kind of looks as though the only way it's really going to end is if Iran's military capability basically is completely destroyed, and if Israel aren't going to be able to do it all on their own, then it looks like America are going to...
Which will be interesting, because of course Trump's whole, don't get involved in foreign wars, etc. I mean, that goes right out the window in bullseye fashion.
Absolutely huge. I mean, that was one of his big selling points. This is not supplying a few guns to an ally. This is much bigger than that. Yeah, this is American military involvement. If you've got American bombers going in there. And you're right, this will cause a real split in the MAGA movement. That was one of Donald Trump's big selling points. One of his big criticisms of Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton. They took us into foreign wars like Iran, like Afghanistan, lots of American lives killed, and for what? I won't get involved in foreign wars. I'll end war, basically. He said he was going to end the Ukraine Russia war. He said he was going to bring peace to the Middle East. Actually, he's discovering it's much easier said than done, and in actual fact he could well end up going in himself. Yeah.
What about this Cobra meeting this afternoon? So the PM has touched down probably around about now from Canada. So straight from that to a Cobra meeting. Never a dull day if you're the Prime Minister. What are we expecting from this? I mean, would anybody be listening to any other countries? Would Israel be listening to any other countries other than the United States on this?
I don't think so. I mean, we're led to believe that Britain didn't even get a heads up before Israel started bombing last week. Relations between Israel and the UK are pretty poor right now. Obviously, there's been criticism by David Lammy and others in the government of what Israel is doing in Gaza, so they're not minded basically to listen to us or help us out in any way. Yeah, this will be an update for the Prime Minister. There'll be senior military figures there, probably the Defence Secretary, I would imagine. David Lammy, I would imagine, will be there as well, other officials, to get the latest intelligence on the ground and the latest update on whether or not Donald Trump is any closer to making his mind up on whether America plans to go in. And then there'll need to be some sort of decision taken on, well, how does the UK respond to that? I'd imagine the message will still be de-escalation. I don't see Britain signing up to help, although we have sent more RAF jets into the region.
You don't think you're going to see Keir put a tweet out saying surrender or something like that? As
doesn't feel like it's
Mr.
his
Trump
style,
did.
does it?
Here's a funny question. Truth Social. This is Donald Trump's sort of social media thing.
Yeah.
It's going to sound terribly naive because I'm normally right across the tech stuff. Kids like me, this is how we roll.
Well known for it.
It's my generation, Kevin. Is Trump the only person on it? I mean, is it just him? Or is it a whole network? Is it like Twitter? Is it like Facebook? I don't know.
That's a very good question. I don't think he's the only one on it. I don't think there must be others sort of
And it's his, isn't it?
like-minded. Yeah, he set it up.
Because we never talk about Elon Musk owns Twitter, but when they were together and doing like all their stuff together in the Oval Office, it was never kind of characterised as, oh, these two guys both own social media networks.
No, you're right. I mean, it was set up basically as a platform for Donald Trump after he was booted off
of Twitter.
Yeah,
I remember that.
After January the 6th, wasn't it? It was after that.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't think it's the only he's the only one on it, but it's certainly like-minded people. It's for those on the right, basically. And Trump supporters.
You just don't see it sort of quoted anyway. You know the Daily Mail are the worst for this. That horrible phrase when it'll say something like, I don't know, fans took to Twitter.
Yeah, I'm sure I've written that a few times.
And I've said it many times. Took to Twitter. That's the recognised linguistic way of how we get there to describe lots of people. We don't know who those people are, because we never, prior to social media, we never ever said something like lots of people drinking in the Rose and Crown said. We never did that. But now we've got, black and white evidence of what some people think of things. But no one ever said it about took to Truth Social.
No, that is true. But I will never look at it to look at what Donald Trump said.
I've got the details. I knew it wouldn't be long before Amy, who's on the desk there, managed to do some diligent research on this. That was a ridiculous thing to say. Amy does nothing, Kevin. It was Adam. So Truth Social has 6.3 million active users.
There you are. So not just Trump.
Not just Trump. But no one ever quotes it. No one ever says, yeah, well, give us your Truth Social name.
No one ever looks at it. It's only ever for Donald Trump.
I might join it this afternoon.
6.3.
Yeah. Just to see how it goes. I mean, I loathe Twitter with a passion.
Yeah.
But you sort of have to look at it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's unavoidable in our game.
Yeah. Well, I saw, even just before I came on air, and I won't even mention who it was or what it was, but it was a classic. It was a sentencing of somebody being sent to jail, and it was edited. So whilst I agreed with some of what was being said, it was edited to make it sound worse.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you look down and, 3 million people have shared this. This is disgusting. It's like, whoa. That's not the truth.
I know.
It's that stuff.
It's depressing.
It's that stuff. People who call themselves journalists who are anything but journalists.
At a time when newspapers are dying.
Yeah.
Well,
citizen journalism is just another way of saying not a journalist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, it's certainly not a trained journalist. And it's not someone usually who's interested in both sides of the story.
Well, it's a shame because there are, and I'm sure they're out there, so big apologies to people who do really good work in a specific area, and they're, it used to be just called bloggers, right? But now it's kind of changed a little bit, and but there are people who call themselves a journalist who are anything but. You only have to just check their Twitter feed.
They've got an agenda.
I might take to Twitter later and make this point. Let's just look at this story. HS2. Opening to be delayed by 2 years after a damning report reveals costs have been driven up by 37 billion.
Yeah,
that's on. I've even forgotten where this HS2 thing goes now, because it was going to go in further than it currently will.
Yeah, well, because Rishi Sunak, remember, went to Manchester for the Tory conference and basically told Manchester you're not getting HS2 anymore.
That's right.
Weirdly, didn't go down terribly well.
Yeah, the advisors were really on their game that day, weren't they? Where should we announce this? Oh, what about Manchester? That's great.
I mean, the whole thing is just a complete farce now. Massively over budget, massively behind schedule, not even going as far as it was supposed to go, and not even, the high speed element is a bit of a misnomer as well. It's not going to be much quicker than the current journey time north, but it's more capacity, bigger trains effectively, and all the disruption, people's houses, countryside has been flattened to make space for HS2.
But you're right about the speed
thing.
To go to Manchester from Euston to Manchester Piccadilly is about 2 hours 9 minutes, and when somebody says we're going to build this super duper fast railway and it's going to make journeys quicker, I'm thinking, right, what's it going to be? 35 minutes, 40 minutes, 2 hours 1 minute? I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me.
8 minutes.
That doesn't work for me.
Does feel very
slicing
high
8 minutes, 15 minutes off it. Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we need new trains, and I am forever staggered how hard it is to build trains. But you just touched on it there, Kevin. That you have to knock people's houses down sometimes, and
we've had things like bat tunnels, all the farcical planning,
nothing without your bat tunnels.
Planning rules.
Absolutely.
And it's just been a farce from start to finish.
I might take to Twitter on this one as well. I think we should all take to Twitter on HS2. Kevin, always good to see you. Thank you. Kevin Schofield is, of course, political editor at HuffPost UK. Over to you as well. We are going to talk in just a moment, connecting to our main story here this afternoon. What is happening in terms of migration and the Channel. Detail to come. Keep it here. It's Talk.
My last two Prime Minister's questions, I've said to Keir Starmer, will you declare a national security emergency in the Channel? And he absolutely refuses to do it. And I think they were in big trouble over this. Big
massive trouble. And that's why I suspect that they're going to try and fudge this whole Casey report.
So do I.
And the investigation.
So do I.
But I don't think the public are going to let them get away with it, because that's, again, the sense that I'm hearing. People are really angry about this. You know, this is almost the final straw.
Well, the thing is, it isn't just the Labour government that's in trouble. Our country's in trouble.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Lots of incredible, powerful stories coming through this afternoon. Lash says, on the sad subject of rape gangs, just because your skin is a different colour should not preclude you from any criticism. I don't like being labelled a racist for having strong views about child safety. The equality laws are there to ensure everyone is dealt with equally, regardless of race or culture. I strongly reserve the right to be solidly inequitable towards vile paedophiles regardless of the colour of their skin. I don't understand the myopic view on this matter, but by the very agencies that should be protecting these poor girls. Bang on. I mean, it's exactly that. Nobody should be feeling guilty for being disturbed by the gross ineptitude, criminal ineptitude of so many agencies and elements, from education to law enforcement through to democratically elected representatives, be they local or national. Feeding into this, the Tories say that Labour's failure on small boat crisis risks fueling more grooming gang cases. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp highlighted Louise Case's report, warning many suspects are asylum seekers or foreign nationals. And again, not getting the kind of momentum, that point, that you might think. Ministry of Justice data shows that just over a quarter of sex assaults on women last year were committed by foreign nationals. Would it be inaccurate to join some dots here? Let's speak with Tom Jones, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Migration Control. Afternoon to you, Tom.
Afternoon, thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's awkward, isn't it? I keep using this word, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. Our previous messenger made the point, you know, feeling that you might have to apologise for saying these kind of things because someone might think you're a mad racist. But there is some irredeemable realities here. It doesn't mean that every non-white person is a sex offender or a criminal. No one thinks that. Or every Pakistani is assaulting children. Blah, blah, blah. But there are certainly areas, and the issue of boat crossings is one of them, where it would be not just remiss but criminally remiss to not look at.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's right. The scale of immigration is now so large that we basically have to face up to some very, very, very uncomfortable truths about the second-order consequences of migration and, frankly, the country that we have now built and that we now are. We have large ethnic enclave populations who exist in Britain, and because of our belief in fundamentally multiculturalism, the idea that we can't, force these people to adapt to our way of life, they have not only, we now have very, very different cultures with very, very different values about women, and in particular about existing girls. And unfortunately, that's just something that we have to face up to now.
Yeah, and of course it is a story that is still developing in the sense of the inquiry that will follow on from it. But you don't need necessarily, you don't need an inquiry. We do need an inquiry, by the way, but you wouldn't need another inquiry just to establish what is there for all to see. And many of us has thought for years that if nothing else, if you have, I mean, let's just take this week, 717 people crossed the Channel in just a few days, over 40,000 since Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister. Even just on the basic law of averages, even if you took out any cultural or nationality or ethnic component, you'd just go, well, out of 40,000 people, there's going to be some wrong-uns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, one of the criticisms that has gone on about the grooming gangs and about sexual crime committed by foreigners is that we seem to care more about crime committed by foreigners than we do by the native population. That's possibly true, but that's a perfectly understandable view to take, given that all crime committed by immigrants is optional. There is always going to be a naturally occurring rate of crime in the domestic population, in the native population, that you can alter to some extent, but there will always be a naturally occurring crime rate. And so therefore all crime committed by immigrants is completely optional. So you're right, there is, even if they were committing crimes at a similar rate to the native population, that would be a big problem.
Sure.
But the really big problem is that they aren't. They're actually committing crimes at a much higher rate than the existing population.
Who's listening to this, Tom, now? Do you think that, do you sense, we were asking the question, will this inquiry lead to real change? But even before the Casey review and the announcement of this inquiry, I would speak to people like yourself on these issues, just all very obvious stuff that, people were raising concerns about this. The data was always there for people to see if they bothered to look. But who's listening at the other end? Or is it the same problem that this whole grooming gang thing has experienced, that there is this strange wall of silence because either those in charge are worried about their own positions, or politically it's simply incompatible with their own ideology and politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is very difficult to know how these things get through. One of the good things is, the Centre for Migration Control today has published some data that we've got through FOIs, that foreign nationals are convicted of a quarter of all sexual assaults committed on women in the UK. So there is data out there. It is available. It is not easily published.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of getting through to the people in charge, I think one of the big problems that we are facing, particularly with the grooming gangs, is that a lot of the people involved in the cover-up of the grooming gangs are still in post. Yeah. They still hold positions of power, probably more significant than those where they were engaged in the cover-up in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think really probably the next stage after the inquiry needs to be the establishment of some new kind of RICO type laws, like the Americans used to roll up the mafia and criminal gangs, that would allow us to prosecute people in public office who've used their public office. Yeah. To engage in a conspiracy of silence.
Yeah, and there is the sense that there are many cases in different elements of public office, whether it's education, law enforcement, whatever, councils, etc. I think the hope is that the inquiry will throw that up, and if it doesn't, I think many people will sense it's not really worth the paper it's written on. Listen, Tom, thank you as ever. Tom Jones, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Migration Control. Somebody here, no name given, says you're banging on about real journalism while staying pretty much silent on this issue for the last 15 years. Take a look at yourself before throwing stones at others, mate. Not like you would read this out because you're not a real journalist. I never said I was, to be honest, but listen, our interest in this subject. I think the first time we talked about it, I remember doing a phone-in and discussing this because it had become front page news on the Times back in 2011. Would have been around about that period. Now, I'm not an investigative journalist, and those that are have at times attempted to get into this story and have at times had success in publishing. The story's not gone. It hasn't been completely silent for 15 years. I was talking to Julia about this a little earlier. And Julia as well, we both talked about this for, I would say, at least a good decade. This has been a recurring subject. Now, you could say I should have dropped everything and only focused on this, although that's not really my area of broadcasting. Others can do that better justice. But the idea that we haven't flagged it, debated it, discussed it, open phone lines on it, spoken to people about it, would be bonkers, mate. And the problem is with the not real journalists is that often it had the very opposite effect, because there were people who did advocate and were saying loads of things, sometimes on TV, but usually on social media, because they were seen as an unreliable kind of source. It actually often stopped people talking about it, and that's not really given much airtime, that thought. But I can absolutely promise you, I can think of at least 3 voices that sort of claim that they were ahead of the game on this particular subject. But actually, one of the reasons they were not listened to is because they already had a pretty moody CV that some people didn't want to touch. So, in fact, far from doing great work, they just because of their own backstory, in fact, almost had the very opposite effect. And that's unfortunate. It's a little like, if Harold Shipman came up with a cure for aging, you'd go, well, that's an amazing cure, but we're not going to really listen to him. And that's been the problem. That's been one of the problems. But actually, there's been some really good... We mention Andrew Norfolk all the time, particularly of late, but he was really the person. Anne Cryer, the Labour MP, brought this up in 2002. Channel 4 made a documentary and then ditched it in 2004. So it's been there. Now we can join the dots a little more. But yeah, I mean, I think the world of media generally, the point I would agree on with the anonymous... texter there is that this should have had more airtime and would have had more airtime had the various powers that be got their act together and responded when innocent children complained of brutal sexual assault and rape. Should have been rather simple in that respect. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This.
Just gone 2:30. We're talking a lot about injustice, and here's a story that has been ticking that box for many years, sadly. Police have admitted they failed 19-year-old Harry Dunn, who was killed on his motorbike back in 2019. You will remember this, the American woman who was driving on the wrong side of the road. Now a review has found that officers prioritised the suspect's welfare, by allowing her to leave the UK through diplomatic immunity. I think her husband worked for the American diplomatic department, hence the reason why she was able to leave the country before facing any kind of questioning. She was eventually convicted of causing death by careless driving in December 2022, but she remains free in America. Let's speak with Rad Seeger, spokesman for the Dunn family. Rad, good to speak with you again, sir. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good to see you as always.
So just give us, before we get into what has happened here, just remind us of the current status of Anne Secoulis, where she is now, and what this conviction of death by careless driving meant in reality for her.
Well, Ian, thanks to your help and your good people's help, we eventually managed to secure justice against all the odds in December 2022, when she was convicted and sentenced at the Old Bailey for killing Harry. And she was sentenced to a custodial sentence, but it was suspended for 12 months, and she's now served that sentence. So she is presumably in the United States getting on with her life.
And she never came to the UK for that sentencing, is that right?
No, our plan was to bring her back physically, but Ian, then COVID hit, and we took the view that we didn't want to separate her from her family, and lots of cases were, for the first time ever, being dealt with remotely, with prisoners sitting in prison rather than coming into court because of COVID.
Yeah.
So we worked with both governments, and it was a first, and she appeared remotely. It had never been done before, but that's a measure of Harry's family. That's who they are.
Yeah, 100%. It was an incredibly generous moment from their perspective. But of course, what makes this now, Rad, and there is a semblance, one would assume, of closure when there is a conviction. It doesn't change the irredeemable facts of the pain and the horror of what happened. But to compound this curious story that should have been very straightforward, we now know that officers prioritised the suspect's welfare by allowing her to leave the UK when they should never have allowed her to leave the UK.
Absolutely right. And so just to bring you and your listeners and viewers right up to speed, once justice was done, we then went through an inquest for Harry, and that concluded last year. And it was at that point, we knew, Ian, and you'll remember our many conversations, we felt we were being mistreated by the authorities, the police, the government. We knew in our guts things were right. So at the end of the inquest, we asked Northamptonshire Police or the Crime Commissioner to commission an independent review into the way they handled the case. And that's the work that's been going on, for well over a year now. And Ian, we knew what we knew.
Yeah.
Which is we thought we were just being denied justice because she was a CIA officer and they spirited her away. But what this report, which we were presented with on Monday, well, it just lays bare an extraordinary catalogue of policing failures from the get-go. And so from the moment Harry was struck and the police showed up, failings in proper policing procedures, investigations, but importantly, the report says that she should and could have been arrested.
Yeah.
And had she been arrested, Ian, the course of history would have been different. And
100%.
They took the benevolent view, and she was in shock, and they let her go. The reason that's important, Ian, is because CIA officers carry many phones. She only disclosed one phone to the police at the time because they didn't arrest her. Had they arrested her, they would have seized her other phones. We've spoken to credible sources, both in London and Washington, who told us that she was on the phone at the time of the crash.
Wow.
Now, we could never prove that, but we'll never know.
And now you will never know, of course.
Now we'll never know. So that's the importance of that. And as you can imagine, that just leaves the family feeling, well, I
was just going to say, Rad, when it was discovered, forgive me, I said at the beginning that I thought she was married to a diplomat. It was actually her that worked in a intelligence capacity, right?
Both her and her husband were CIA officers at this base. They're described as diplomats widely. That's not right. They had diplomatic immunity because they were CIA officers.
But if you work for the CIA, and you will know this, Rad, I mean, working for the CIA, there's many levels you can work at the CIA. You can be right at the top of the tree. You can't just be a CIA officer. I'm not underplaying, someone's great credentials, but there are thousands of CIA officers out there. This pair happened to be in the UK. Maybe they were doing some very specific work. Is it then possible that at a local police station level, the officers there or the most senior officer there decreed that, oh yeah, they're CIA, we must allow them to get on their way and go back to the UK? Would that have been elevated higher than just a cop at a police station? Would somebody in government have authorised their ability to leave the UK after this?
They did not play the diplomatic immunity card in until a few days later. So in those moments after the crash, none of that was in play. And we can only imagine that the officers at the time obviously had the specter of big bad American government hanging over them and thought, well, look, these people don't live very far away. They seem like good people. We'll just let them go. And Tsoukalos did assure them that she had no plans to leave the country. Yeah. It was a disastrous approach to Harry's rights at the time, Ian, and they've held their hands up and apologized and said it'll never happen again. But, look, it's a bittersweet pill for us. We're devastated by the way it was handled, but equally we commend the new leadership for taking such a candid and transparent approach, because that's been important to Harry's family, that what they've been through never happens again.
Absolutely. Listen, Rad, do pass on our best, as ever, to Harry's family. Thank you again for being with us, and I'm sure we will speak again. He's Rad Seeger, spokesman for the Dunn family. Harry, of course, he was just 19 when he was killed on his motorbike because the American CIA officer was driving on the wrong side of the road, and suggestion there from Rad, even on the phone at the same time as well. Thank you to him. More comments coming in from you. Lee says, when we've seen no accountability for the post office scandal and no one in power has seen jail time and postmasters still haven't got their promised remuneration despite all the media, I don't think anyone in power responsible for their silence or cover-ups in the grooming gangs will see justice. I despair that these people are and will remain in power. And there it is. You had a top cop in the case of Harry Dunn, who had to walk the plank because I think he pretended he was a Falklands War hero or something. He even turned up at certain events with medals on. Just made it up. So he's gone. But all the while you have these stories, what the system seems to be scared of is the same thing every time. That there is almost an instinct to want to protect the system. And whether that system is the NHS, whether it's the post office, whether it is a department of government, whether it is the government, that's almost the first port of call. I don't know whether they do this. I don't know whether they sit at a meeting and literally say it out loud, right, before anything else, we've got to protect the NHS. Clearly, they want to make sure they contextualise things. But nonetheless, that seems to always take precedence over justice. Carl is in Liverpool. Carl, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
It's just on the cover-up and stuff, and obviously the inquiry. I'm worried that we won't get to know everything. I think you said something earlier about the shredding machines being at the ready and stuff. I actually think that could be something true, because whoever's responsible in this whole thing from top to bottom, they need to be dealt with just as severely as those men who actually did the grooming, because they are complicit.
100%.
Just to know about this and not do anything shows that there's no moral compass with these people. You know, they shouldn't be in these positions if they're not for the people, working for the people. It's just terrible. I just can't believe that we live in a world where people could turn their backs on these when they were young girls. You know,
I mean, everything about this is beyond belief, and you would imagine in a parallel world, Carl, that someone had just made this up, right? You should go, really? Well, how could all of those people have covered it up? But that seems to be where we're going with this.
Yeah, and you know, he's been forced into this. Like he was forced to do the U-turn on the winter fuel tax because so many people are in uproar about it.
Yeah.
And the evidence is there. There's nowhere for him to go. But rather than be the bigger person, because you've had this for months now, and say, we will do the investigation regardless of ethnicity or whatever, because it's the right thing to do by these young girls. You know, because it's their lives that are affected and their families' lives. Yet this man has had to backtrack and go back on his own word, saying that he won't have an inquiry. Now he's doing it. He looks weak because he hasn't got that authority. We all know he bores us to death with his voice because everything that comes out of him is a lie.
Yeah.
And for him to backtrack like he has done just shows, you know, he's spineless for me. I just don't like the man. I think the sooner that government's out, the better. But we all know we've got another 4 years, so I think
maybe something will happen before then, Carl.
Well, yeah, hopefully. But you know what? In the short year that they've been in government, they've made some catastrophic decisions that have affected the working class people, the middle class people.
100%. Yeah. Well, they don't really know what working class people are, so that's one of the problems of government.
To do now is think, well, what more damage can we do whilst this inquiry is going ahead? Because we're not going to hear anything about this until it's complete.
Well, it also gives them a bit of a get-out, doesn't it? Anyone that gets questioned, it's like, well, let's wait for the inquiry. You know that line, and we'll probably have that for the next 3 years. We'll wait and see. Carl, thank you very much indeed for that. Great call. These are all great calls. This one comes from Scotty. Scott's in Birmingham, who says, in the 90s, when I was a boy, I was groomed by Pakistanis, not sexually, but for everything else, including drugs. I was in a children's home in Birmingham, and a girl in there was a victim of sexual grooming and passed around like meat between their associates. She was raped numerous times, but didn't understand rape. I remember it like it was yesterday. My point is, this has been going on and covered up for years. In addition, I used to deliver the sex offender treatment program within probation and prisons. Do you know that Muslims are exempt from the course due to religion and their beliefs? Yes, they don't even get compelled to do the sex offender treatment programs. Is that still the case? In addition, reference this inquiry, do we really think we'll get answers when Labour look after their own? Rachel from Accounts lied on her CV for a position of trust. This is surely a crime, fraud by false representation. No arrest, no convictions. Seems saying sorry is all that is needed. Then we have Jonathan Reynolds, again, committed a criminal offence of falsely stating he was a solicitor. And just last week, the RSA ripped him a new one, threatening that if he ever states it again, he'll get prosecuted. Again, why no arrest, just an apology? If Labour can cover up little blips like this, do you really seriously think they'll tell the truth on an inquiry? No. Oh, and then Jess Phillips, who during the Southport riots condoned violence in Bawdsley Green as Muslims were, and I quote, protecting their community despite a white lad being beaten to a pulp. It's all a fraud. Thank you for that, Scott. I won't read out the very last line because I think there's some legal ramifications with that, but interesting nonetheless. Thank you very much indeed. Great comment. We'll take a short pause. Jacqueline, don't go away. I'm going to be with you in just a second. Our lines are open 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
are hitting the head of the snake, the vicious program of the Iranian regime to actually destroy Israel, and to have these 3 layers of program. One was the nuclear program, the second was the ballistic missile program, and the third was the invasion program through the proxies. That was the big plan of the Iranians. I mean, we're talking about a regime that put a huge clock in the center of Tehran that is counting down until Israel is eliminated.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. John says, I agree with the anonymous texter. The media have been pathetic when it comes to covering the rape gang scandal, and it's sickening to hear so many of you trying to defend your past records on what is nothing short of a national disgrace. A lot of news editors should be in jail. Well, I don't think you necessarily go to jail for that. I mean, you could argue that about so many cases. You could say, well, what about the post office scandal? I first heard about the post office scandal. In fact, I'd almost go as far as to say we might have been one of the first shows that ever mentioned it. We weren't certainly the first. I'm not claiming anything on this, by the way. It was our guest, Nick, that raised it at the time. But that was ages before it ever... And I literally remember the line saying, why is this not on the front pages every day? It's so big. It's so huge, this scandal. But it depends what you mean by the media. I mean, you've got to have the right people doing the job. That isn't literally... You could say, well, what about the blood scandal? I literally know some people involved in the blood scandal. Didn't know anything about it until recently, to this level. Why didn't you take up that course? Why didn't you take up this course? So, yeah, you could say the media is a big, wide umbrella of millions of people. And individuals will often take up cases and they'll do incredibly well. And history is full of, the diligent ones who put in the graft and often didn't get paid for it, and that's brilliant. But there's also another issue, and that is standing up a story. Once in a while you'll hear a rumour. Social media at the moment is full of stories of apparently an MP who's a paedophile, or they're using the word nonce. There's no evidence of this so far, by the way, but it's being said on social media. Now, you can't just say that. You can't just say, oh, right, you then have to go down a different rabbit hole. Now, investigative journalists can do that because that's specifically what they do if they think there's reason. You would literally be there all day, but I will defend parts of the media that did still talk about grooming gangs. I mean, what you're asking for is a little bit of psychicness, probably the ability to put something together in a way that simply was beyond the capability of any 1, 2, 3 or 4 or 5 individuals. So I agree that when you look back and go, why was this not a bigger story? The world is full of those examples. Why was that post office? Blood scandal. I mean, there's another one in here. There's a whole load of them that you can say, why is that not a bigger story? So, yeah, if you ask the question in that way, it should be a bigger story. If you want to put everyone in jail because they didn't advocate or somehow follow up the story that interests you the most or the one you feel more passionately about, I think that's a tricky conversation. And I hope that's a reasonable answer to John in London, who's raised that point. Probably not, but it's the best I've got. Jacqueline in London. How you doing, Jacqueline?
Hi, fine, thank you, Ian.
Good.
I was just wondering, no one's brought up the involvement of the NHS here or GPs, because if these girls were seeking medical attention
Good point.
for abortions, miscarriages, giving birth, or even, turn up drunk on drugs, where was the doctors and nurses? Why weren't they questioning, well, how comes all of a sudden we've got all these girls turn up who come from, a lot of them come from the home down the road, or they're coming in with men in their mid-40s and saying they're their boyfriends. Like, why wasn't nothing like a big investigation going on?
Do you know what?
in the hospitals?
You've raised a really good point, because we keep talking about, you know, local councils, local law enforcement, local schools, because that surely must have, you know, no one's going to tell me there wasn't one single teacher that didn't hear the rumour that, you know, one of the 13-year-old girls was sleeping with a 45-year-old man and his friend. I mean, that must have been the case. But I hadn't really considered the medical aspects as well. There must have been, I'm not saying every victim sought medical help, but some must have done.
But there had
Some
to be
must
on
have
a
done.
large scale. On
Some
a large
must have
scale,
done,
there
yeah.
had to be. You know, because if there's thousands and thousands of girls, there has to be records kept of who was called when they got to the hospitals, you know, if they were in homes. Who actually came into the A&E with them? What doctors were sending them for abortions, you know, and not questioning why all of a sudden we've got a lot of 14 and 15-year-old girls, or maybe 13 or 12, having miscarriages and abortions.
It's absolutely spot on. Jacqueline, that's such a powerful point, and I don't think I've heard anyone raise that, because we're looking at all the different agencies and different areas that could have seen something and didn't, and you'd absolutely have to include health professionals in that. I mean, clearly not all, but there must have been some. Jacqueline, thank you very much indeed for that. More comment on the way. And by the way, a few of you saying, yes, I mean, the idea that nothing was said. There was a 7-year inquiry that started in sex offences, that started in 2014, 15, I think it was. So there's not been silence in it, but it just didn't touch enough onto this. It did cover grooming gangs, but it didn't cover all aspects of it, and it missed out some really fundamental areas. To be fair to Alexis J, who did the report, it was a wider brief than just grooming gangs. It was about child sex offences generally, in whatever setting or scenario that was. So again, the idea there's been nothing said. Now you can join all the dots and see things a little clearer, and we were able to speak with more clarity. Yeah, you can see the enormity of just this one aspect. Similarly, someone else saying, why didn't you speak up against abuse in the Catholic Church? It probably predates me a little bit, because that's been on forever. Also the Church of England. You could go to all of those subjects. I'll talk to Chris in just a second. By way of some light relief, the Voice of Doom. I think it's day 5. Hey, day 5 of the Voice of Doom. It's the mystery voice with a political angle. Here's the voice.
I can't guarantee that.
It is a politician, past or present. I'll let you decide. But who is it? Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
Message 87222 if you think you know, and hopefully we'll tell you after the news who it is, but only if we get a right answer. It's a tricky one. I know it's a tricky one. Who is this?
I can't guarantee that.
And I can't guarantee we'll get a winner. If you think you know, 87222. Chris is in Epsom. Chris, good afternoon.
I think I know it is him. I'm not going to say anything.
All right, far away.
Well, one good thing today, Rayner did actually promise a full nationwide inquiry with full statutory powers. So she needs to be held to that now. But I can imagine there's loads and loads of paperwork being shredded up and down the country.
Well, you do wonder, don't you? The thing, let me say that again without stuttering. The thing I was wondering is whether there's been any kind of message sent to local authorities. If you have any data on this, then, you know, it needs to be kept, and we'll be checking, blah, blah, blah.
Well, one thing I'm going to pick you up with, Ian, we shouldn't let that woman off on that 7-year inquiry. There was only 2 pages of evidence about grooming gangs. Maggie Oliver was denied permission to give evidence.
And many others. That's very true. I'm not letting her off. I'm saying it wasn't her fault. I mean, she was given a brief.
It was a wider ranging into child exploitation, not just the grooming gangs.
Correct.
Sean Davis, the Telford MP, he has lied to the House. An absolute barefaced lie.
What was the specific lie? A lot of people are saying this.
The specific lie was that he said that
he wanted an inquiry.
And Sunak had denied him an inquiry, and Rudd has still got the letter from him where he wrote to her saying that they did not need a further inquiry.
Absolutely, and I think that letter has been published as well, saying it wasn't just him. There were many other signatures on it, if I remember rightly.
He needs to, but they didn't lie to the House.
No,
he
that's
needs to be brought back to the House and apologise and be sacked, just like Mandelson.
Is there a letter that he asked for an inquiry?
No, he asked them not to give an inquiry.
No, I know that bit, but he's now claiming that he did ask for an inquiry to Rudd and Sunak.
Nah, mate, he's wiggling around on the hook.
Wiggling like a what's-it. Chris, stay there, don't go away. 0344 499 1000. Who is this?
I can't guarantee that.
Voice of Doom, answer, coming after the news at 3.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, it is indeed the afternoon empire. It's also the voice of common sense. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Labour's failure to tackle the small boat crisis risks fueling more grooming gang cases, according to the Tories as Ministry of Justice data. And this is disturbing. Shows over a quarter of sex assaults on women last year were committed by foreign nationals. What do you extrapolate from that rather disturbing stat? Also this afternoon, Prime Minister Keir Starmer chairing an emergency Cobra meeting as we speak to discuss the Middle East crisis, with Iran warning the United States involvement could trigger a full-scale war. This could get, this is already a very disturbing and dangerous story, and it's still developing. Which way will it go? And more private landlords will be expected to house asylum seekers to fulfil Rachel Reeves' promise to end the use of migrant hotels and save taxpayers, apparently, £1 billion. Is that likely to be the reality? Paul Champlina will join us a little later. He's the founder of Landlord Action, of course, and a regular with us on the programme to help us out on these issues. Thank you for all of your comments so far. If you want to get in touch, 0344 499 1000. David says, David in the Cotswolds, Good afternoon, Ian. Is that figure correct? 40,000 illegal immigrants have crossed the Channel since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister and started the smashing the gangs thing. That's a horrendous figure. I think he needs a new strategy, and fast. Yes, you wouldn't get a job at Saatchi & Saatchi, would you, with that kind of logo? Hey, here's my logo. How's it going? Well, not that well, actually. 40,000 people, 40,276 since Keir Starmer came to power. That figure is going to rise, of course, because it's another, two and a bit weeks before it's the first anniversary of Starmer being Prime Minister. I mean, that's incredible, right? It's a year gone. 40,276 so far that he's presided over. Let's just quickly do the voice of doom. Day 5, the mystery voice with a political edge to it. Here's the voice.
I can't guarantee that.
But who is it? Some of the guesses. Lord Balamoria, no. It's a bit like him. Norman St John Stevens, no. Douglas Hurd, Cecil Parkinson, Norman Fowler, Norman Tebbit, no. Michael Howard, again Michael Howard. It's a little bit Howardy, it's not him. Desmond Swain, no. Stanley Johnson, father of, no. We do not have a correct answer. As predicted, I think this one's going to go on for about 7 years. Can we hear the voice again, Amy?
I can't guarantee that.
It's not Michael Howard, all right? We know that. We'll do it again tomorrow. You are looking for a former or a current MP. Think on those lines. Now let's move to this story at 5, nearly 6 minutes after 3 o'clock. Iran is warning that any US intervention in the Middle East conflict would be a recipe for all-out war. The country's supreme leader says the nation will never surrender as Donald Trump considers joining Israel in bombing nuclear sites. Israel says it's hit over 40 Iranian targets today, while thousands, of course, are fleeing Tehran amid rising tensions. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as I mentioned, is chairing an emergency Cobra committee meeting to discuss the security situation. Let's get a word from Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, OBE, former British Army colonel, often helps us out on these kind of stories. Hamish, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, let's look at that phrase that's coming out of Iran, a recipe for all-out war. Do you concur with that?
No, I don't. I think the Iranians have really, thrown the kitchen sink, as it were, at Israel. And certainly in the last 48 hours, they've been a lot less successful with their missiles and drones. I can't really see how Iran can extend this war. All their allies have been absolutely deafening with their silence. Their closest ally, Putin, the only thing he's done is offered, rather ironically and beyond parody, to be the honest broker between Iran and Israel. So I think they're really stuffed. They've got a huge army, that's for sure, but it's pretty ancient stuff. So I don't think they can escalate, and I'm not sure that the majority of the rank and file, as it were, in Iran actually sort of support the Ayatollah, from his. Yeah.
Well, there certainly seems to be a sense that the people of Iran would rather be led by someone else and have a slightly different kind of regime to live under. That's often evidenced by the amount of people legging it from Iran. I don't know of anyone that ever said, I'm going to go and live in Iran for the next few years. Never happened, of course. That's another point, perhaps. In terms of targeting, Hamish, on this point, it's very accurate stuff, and, the Israelis are incredibly experienced at these kind of responses or attacks in this case, in order to stamp out or arrest Iran's nuclear capabilities. Now, how far do you think they might have got with that? We did speak to a former ambassador to Iran last week, former British ambassador, who thought it was all, well, in his words, BS. I won't say it out loud, although he did at the time. He said, no, they don't have any nuclear capabilities. They're not doing anything like that, which slightly surprised me because I didn't think that bit was in doubt.
No, I don't think it was. And the Iranians themselves last week said that they had enriched uranium beyond 60%. And that is what you need to make nuclear weapons. We know they've got missiles. So I don't think there's any doubt at all that the Iranians were trying to get a nuclear capability. As far as Israeli targeting go, it's amazing how comprehensive their network of spies and Mossad is across Iran to do these detailed attacks. And they seem to have been pretty successful. We haven't seen any great deal amount of contamination from nuclear material. And I don't think we will. Again, I think there's a lot of people talking a lot of BS, as you call it, about the potential for a nuclear contamination and a nuclear explosion from what the Israelis are doing. That just won't happen. The final piece, which I suppose is what Trump is talking about now, is it would appear that the final bit of their nuclear program is a place called Fordow, which is a mountain, and the actual centrifuges are deep underground, and probably the only people who can deal with that are the Americans and their massive ordnance penetrator weapon. And that's where I think the discussion is whether Trump is going to allow that to happen to completely finish any aspirations Iran has for a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, what do you imagine America's inclusion in this could be? I mean, so far it hasn't been military based. It's a war of a contribution, of support and some warnings to the Ayatollah, etc. Not going to kill him yet, I think was the phrase that Trump put up there. We're living in a whole different world of how people do politics these days, but that's what he said. Do you feel, Hamish, that America could, in the next 24 hours, launch a military impact into Iran that comes from American personnel, as given the green light by the American president?
Well, I think there is certainly a possibility, but I would see it to be very limited. I think the only thing the Americans would do is to fire this massive ordnance penetrator, which they could do. I mean, the Ayatollah has threatened US and British bases in the region, but let's not forget that the Ayatollah doesn't have any of his proxies anymore. Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq have all been destroyed. That were his mechanism for attacking the West. That's gone now. So I don't think there'll be any more US involvement than potentially the penetrator. And I really don't see that this could escalate into a much wider conflict, because it is just Iran at the moment against Israel and potentially the US, and both those countries vastly overmatch what Iran could do.
Let me just bring you up to date then, Hamish, because Mr. Trump is speaking literally at this moment in Washington. Here's a little of what he said. He's speaking to the White House, where he's been asked whether the US is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities. He says, "You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question?" Which, fair enough, he is the president. It'd be a bit weird if he went, "Yeah, in a week on Tuesday. Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component, and what time exactly, sir? Would you like to strike it," etc. He's parodying the question. He added, "You don't know what I'm going to even do. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it." He says, "Nobody knows what I'm going to do, but he can say this: Iran's got a lot of trouble and they want to negotiate." So a very sort of typical Trump-like response. He's left it hanging. But yeah, probably a silly question from a journalist. When are you going to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they will do it at a time of their choosing. There'll be a whole bunch of variables involved here. But I suppose what Trump's hoping to do, in his usual fashion of making a deal, is to get the Ayatollah around the negotiation table because he doesn't want to be further humiliated by having his nuclear capability completely destroyed. But we shall see. We never quite know with Trump, but let's hope he's got it right this time.
Indeed. Hamish, thank you as ever for your time. Hamish de Breton Gordon, OBE, former British Army Colonel. How's this one going to pan out? Paddy is in Sussex on this very point. Paddy, what are you making of this? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. I can see, and everyone can see, why Israel wouldn't want Iran to have nuclear missiles.
Yeah.
But what puzzles me is, why can't everyone not understand why Putin doesn't want NATO nukes right up against his border in Ukraine? It's going to lower the decision time to some ridiculous level and put both us and Russia
it's higher.
So you're saying that, in fact, when it comes to national security, that is a more pressing situation than what's happening in Tehran?
Well, I'm just pointing out that it's the exact same situation. Israel doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons pointing at it, and Putin doesn't want our nukes right up against his country.
Is Israel a bit more specific, Paddy, in the sense of Iran's place in the Middle East in terms of what it's said about Israel, what it wants to do to Israel, the fact that it's largely the sponsor of most terrorism in that neck of the woods? Is it more pressing right now for Israel than the other scenario, which is a fair point, by the way?
Yeah, Israel has actually said all these things about Iran, but I've watched with my lying eyes what Israel has done to Gaza, how many tens of thousands of people they've murdered in Gaza.
Some would say this is war, and Dresden back in the Second World War is an example of carnage and horror that comes as a result. And I'm saying that objectively. That seems to be the response to the point you've just raised.
Well, I would say the people responsible for Dresden should have been, they should have the same fate as the Nazi war criminals.
But they were fighting Nazism and fascism and, all the cliches apply. What would Europe look like had Nazism won?
Well, Dresden, that was part of area bombing, and our stated aim for area bombing was to kill as many German civilians as possible. There was no military targets, purely civilians, to destroy the will of the German people.
Yeah.
War crimes.
Which was happening over here as well, of course. The Germans were doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but remember, we attacked them first. We sent bombers to Germany before they laid a finger on it.
But I don't think anybody seriously thinks we started the Second World War.
From our point of view, we did.
But is there any historian out there that's ever made that argument? Maybe there is, Paddy.
Well, it was a world war. We turned it into a world war.
Did we turn it into a world war, or did others around, allies, turn it into a world war?
Well, we turned it into.
Or is it by definition just a world war because it should be a world war?
Yeah, whatever. But we sent 100 bomber raids to Germany, to Munster, before they attacked us with bombers. People should not forget that.
Indeed, and nobody is disputing the chronology, but that doesn't mean to say we started the war, right? I mean, if you're responding to something that is such a horrific threat to not just a country in that neck of the woods, but the wider world, and I think we can safely say that what Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime were up to was clearly an ambitious takeover that was meant to spread way beyond, nicking a bit of Poland.
Well, maybe not. I think we declared war on Germany first. We attacked Germany first. The war could have remained on the continent. There's no reason for us to get involved, to be honest.
Okay.
Hitler invaded Poland, and Poland at that time was not a democracy.
It's an interesting. Listen, I bow to your knowledge, Paddy, on this, and it's all of these sort of analogous moments are relevant to understanding the nature of war and invasion, etc. So to raise it is completely fair. I just hadn't really heard anyone make the overarching argument that we were responsible for the war, as distinct for, you might have fired the first shot in response to XYZ. Listen, Paddy, I'll move on for no other reason than time. You've been great. I absolutely know there's a military historian out there chomping at the bit going, I have to respond to Paddy. If that is you, I'm all ears at this end. 0344 499 1000.
I gave a presentation last Monday and said I thought that Iran's regime wouldn't last 6 months. That was before the Israeli attacks. I think it's just accelerated now, given the conditions inside Iran. 70% of people on less than $5 a day. They hate their government. The only thing that's holding them in place right now is the heavily repressive apparatus of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the security services.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Ian, who says, how can Paddy compare NATO to Iran? Why cannot people think clearly? Iran is hostile towards Israel. Ukraine is not hostile to Russia. If anything, it wants nothing to do with Russia. Margaret, on a different point, says, Starmer holding a Cobra meeting. Yes, of course he should. But what about the boat crisis? He's tone deaf, blinkered, and doing absolutely nothing. Get a deterrent now. We are being invaded. And, of course, that story is now... I don't think it's really settled with most people how that extraordinary news that 1 in 4 sex offenders are a foreign national, and the group... And, again, this came up during the Casey review. She literally wrote, we noted that a significant proportion of cases, this is talking about grooming gangs, involve suspects who are non-UK nationals and or are claiming asylum in the UK. At the same time that lands on Keir Starmer's desk, so does the statistic that 40,276 presumably asylum seekers have come to the UK. Right, so that's where we're at. And as Margaret says, the bloke's holding a Cobra meet. You know, when it comes to any other business, can't someone, Rayner or someone, pitch up and go, you know, you've got this bit of an uncomfortable situation here, Prime Minister. Maybe we can discuss that, but you know what? They won't. Marty in Dis says, I fully agree there should be a national inquiry into rape gangs because this is a national emergency. I feel that it would be wrong for the UK legal system to profit from the extra work involved. Public sector legal salaries are large and the UK is in deep debt. I just feel that it would be wrong if the legal system saw this as an opportunity to profit. Well, you know, when these things happen, you know how they seem to pan out. You get the judge on an inquiry, then you get, you know, a load of other judges, or certainly barristers, who are asking questions, not always the same one. Some of them become slightly famous when it happened. I'm trying to think of the last one. Was it COVID, where the fellow with the beard, he was very effective. People were quite fearful of him. All those people are getting paid a lot of money to do those inquiries. So don't hold your breath, Marty, but I certainly agree with the point. Elaine is in Derbyshire. Elaine, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hello, Ian.
Hi.
I used to be a foster carer,
Okay.
and I'm now an adopter, so I wanted to explain to you the care home angle.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people can't understand why the care home staff were allowing the children to go with these men. And if you let me a little bit of time to explain. So,
please do.
Care home staff are not vetted in the same way as foster carers.
Okay.
So as long as you've got a clean DBS, you can become a support worker in a care home. So the care home staff are the people who are like doing the day-to-day stuff with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
The care home manager will be vetted in a similar way that a foster carer is, but she's not there most of the time.
Yep.
And also, when you're a foster carer and a care home staff, because of Gillett competency, which has been expanded and used in ways that it never was meant to be, things like you as a foster carer, if you had a 14-year-old, wouldn't be able to look on their phone. You don't even get a decision whether they can have a phone or not. It's up to the social worker. And now we're plain speaking. I'm just going to speak plainly. And because this is the time to speak plainly, a lot of social workers are middle-class white woke women like Stella Creasy, that type of type.
Yeah.
So your child is at the mercy of how basically woke the social worker is. So they try to parent the children in the same way that they would parent their children. So they would have them staying out to 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. They don't see the issue of them having lots of sex because it's like the patriarchy oppressing them or whatever. So as a foster carer, if you want the child to be home by 9, if you've got a woke social worker, you have to battle with the social worker. And then obviously children want to stay out as late as possible.
Yeah,
So
when you're
they're not
14, 15, if you could stay out till that time, that would be amazing. I never did, but it'd be incredible.
They're not gonna be happy as a foster carer, so they're going to appeal to the weakest person in the triangle, which is a social worker. And also, for example, if they have medical appointments and things like that, because of Gillick competency, you can't attend. They don't have to tell you, and the nurses don't have to tell you. So literally, you could be a foster carer of a 13-year-old girl, and as we've seen with all this transgender nonsense, the woke school, the woke social worker, and the woke doctor is keeping it from you.
But does the Gillick competency criteria, the test, so this is where, if I've got this right, where a kid, is adult enough to make their own decisions, basically, particularly medical?
Well, the problem is, this is just being used now. So, for example...
Well, that's what I was going to say, but is there no check or balance on that? So if a 13-year-old says, I want to go and have sex, everyone around them's got to go, OK, that's fine.
Well, so I'll give you an example. During COVID, a lot give their children the COVID vaccine. So the government said, Gillick competency, we're going to take it out of parents' hands and place it in schools, and then it's up to the child.
Yep.
And this is the problem. But what is happening is when certain people have their own agenda, same with the transgender stuff, let the child decide. We're not even going to inform parents if the child's changed their name. They're like crazy. So my thing is that you've got your sort of Stella Creasy type social work, and they're totally on board with that. They think that the parent sort of is like in the way, of the child being their true self, or the care worker. And this is the problem with it, is that people don't understand. Being a foster carer in 2025 or a care worker is a lot like being a teacher. You don't have any power. You're literally at the mercy of how woke the social workers is. And from what I was hearing, the social workers were attending and when we make being a racist worse than being a rapist, then we have a problem, because I've got 2 kids in. I'd rather live next door to a racist any day than a pedophile.
It's an unfortunate analogy, but I know exactly what you mean, and I think most people would get that as well. The Gillick competence thing does it not? And I think you've just answered the question, actually, so forgive me for going over it again. Yeah. If a child appears to be, I guess the phrase would be Gillick competent, that has to be assessed by those around them. But your contention here, Elaine, is that those around them are the problem.
Yeah, because like I said, if you're sort of a woke, blue-haired, sort of Stella Creasy type social worker, right, and you're 24, you think sex work is real work, you think, not being allowed to have as much sex as you like is sort of the patriarchy, burning down. If you have foster carers who may be a bit more conservative or even religious, which a lot of foster carers actually are, you will see that as like, you're actually opposed to those foster carers, like you're pre-positioned to be opposed to those type of people. So 100%. You will think it's some sort of right-wing, sort of Christian thing. And this is the problem. And then what happens is the child will just ask to be moved. So this is the problem.
Yeah.
And people don't understand this. So I'm sure there was some malice, but in some cases, having been a foster carer myself, having to battle foster workers, it's not just malice. Some of it will be that, some woke social worker was like, we can't be telling. Even the testimony of some of the dads was that from the dads of children who've been abused, they were physically trying to stop their daughters leaving the house to meet these men, and the woke social worker was telling the dads, well, you're going to have the rest of your children removed, and we're going to be having an investigation into you.
Yeah, well, because it suited their instincts to believe that these girls weren't really doing anything wrong, you know, and it was great for, you know, diversity. Maybe that was their thinking. Elaine, I've got to stop there just because of time. I want to thank you. It's a great call. Really powerful stuff from Elaine in Derbyshire. Let's get a quick word from Tony in North Wales on the same issue. Tony, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hi, and thanks for taking my call.
Pleasure.
Please forgive me if I start stuttering a bit, as I just did then, because my nerves might punch me in the back of the throat. So I'll bear with me a second. But what I was thinking, and I've not heard anybody say this yet, but people are talking about various levels of authority being potentially complicit and so on and so forth. There is a very specific law for this, which I haven't heard anybody mention, called accessory after the fact. And that carries a punishment in broad terms, roughly 50% of the fine or 50% of the term of imprisonment of the perpetrators. I haven't heard anybody mention it, but this goes even further, because if this inquiry is going to be done properly, then anybody who tries to shield an individual during the course of their investigation surely could be had up for the same thing.
Well, you might think so.
Well, logic would say so.
Well, logic would say so. I mean, this clearly isn't going to be the work of a moment, is it, this inquiry?
No.
Because there's definitely going to be elements of it that, when people are saying, no, that's the most important bit, there's going to be elements that aren't included. And I don't think because of a conspiracy. I just think that at some point they've got to go, right, these are the 50 things we're going to investigate, but otherwise we're going to end up here for 10 years.
Quite possibly, but I'm not aware that there is a statute limitation on accessory after the fact. So while the investigation itself can be relatively short, then surely pursuing the accessories, as it were, has an unlimited time span.
You'd think so. Tony, great point. Thank you. These are great calls we're getting this afternoon. So many different angles that you're not really hearing anywhere else. It's the home of common sense. That's why we bring you stuff. And it works. We have some great guests on. We have some brilliant speakers and all sorts of people join us on certain areas of expertise. We'll be doing that in just a moment. But ultimately, programmes like this and stations like Talk rest largely on the brilliant, it all sounds a bit patronising, doesn't it? But I genuinely mean this, the brilliant contributions from you guys, and we've had loads. Sometimes you get wonky contributions and they're a bit odd, but they kind of make up the rich tapestry that is public opinion, I guess. And it's a democracy, for goodness sake. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk a little bit about property in a second. Paul Champlina, founder of Landlord Action, a regular with us on the issue of property. There's a lot to talk about. Questions you want to put to Paul. We'll do all of that coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 25 to 4. If you can hear some rustling in the background, that is Paul Champlina crawling into the studio. And when I say crawling into the studio, I mean it's because you were avoiding the camera.
Well, I wasn't drunk.
Well, you didn't actually have to duck, to be fair, did you?
Here we go.
No, I wasn't going to do a high.
I thought you'd come up with some new material by now. I've known you for years, Ian.
I wasn't going to go for a high jump. What I was trying to do was actually explain the rustling. But there's a good reason for that, because when you come in, you're always diligently prepared.
I am. I'm the ultimate professional.
You really are. You really are. You've worked in... How long have you worked in property now for?
I would say 34, 35 years. I started Animal Action 25 years ago. We were on our 25th anniversary this year. I know. And tomorrow, I didn't tell you, tomorrow we've got our 10th anniversary for the charity boxing event I put on called Run By The Agents, where we're actually raising money for Centrepoint, which is a really, really good...
I did get an invite to that.
You did, but you blew me out again.
I blew you out again, yeah. You know, Thursday night. You'll have a Thursday night.
Well, I can't do it. I can't do it. I mean, actually, you'll be used to a Thursday night, won't you, being a Chelsea fan?
There you go. He's so funny. We always like to chat to Paul every few weeks just to talk about the big stories around the world of property, particularly with landlords and renters and the bills that are going through Parliament and, you know, what's it going to look like and when's it eventually going to come out. But we are hearing this story that more landlords are expected to house asylum seekers than ever before. There's a good reason for this, and I think a lot of people are saying, well, don't blame the landlord, because, you know, one of the issues there is you've got guaranteed rent, guaranteed repairs, and goodness knows what. If that's your industry, renting out a house, you've seen the hassle the government are creating with the Renters' Rights Bill, then what greater way to guarantee a rent income?
Well, look, I mean, look, on your station, and you heard it when I was driving it, when I was driving before, I mean, we got a big migration issue, obviously. At the moment, there's 225 hotels housing migrants. We've got a massive hotel,
isn't it?
a massive bill with regard to the welfare state. Obviously, they need to move into houses. With regard to what happens with the Renters' Rights Bill, if you can get guaranteed rent, and you can get that from the government or from one of the free providers. There's Clear Springs and there's Mears and there's Serco, where they manage the property for you, and there's no rent arrears because you worry about getting your property back. And the court delays, and they're banning Section 21 and property management. You know, for a lot of landlords, it does make sense. At the end of the day, you are housing someone, a human being. You know, I know obviously there's going to be a political debate relating, well, you shouldn't be housing migrants and stuff like that, but you know, at the end of the day, people need to live somewhere. And there's affordability, and obviously we can be talking about this forever. But I mean, you know, I work with a company, and you know them, called Elliott Lee. They do temporary housing accommodation and stuff like that. So I think guaranteed rent with a really bona fide provider is going to be a way forward for landlords.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that's, I mean, that in itself is just one of many stories around this issue of landlords, of asylum. But of course, as you mentioned, the number of hotels, it's all very well Keir Starmer going, yeah, we're going to clear those hotels as if they've achieved something, but they won't really. They just move people into
they do, and
private
then of course,
accommodation.
And then of course you have housing stock, and then you have landlords leaving the sector, and obviously we're going to talk about that in a minute with regard to the taxes. There's all these different moving parts. I mean, I can just tell you where. You know, when I put my property, when I put my landlord, you know, my event, my boxing event, Run By The Agents on tomorrow, that hotel Holiday Inn has been closed for 5 years since COVID, housing asylum seekers and temporary accommodation, not open to the public. I mean, we have 280 people coming and they can't stay in the hotel. So that's really frustrating. You've heard some horrendous stories about people having weddings cancelled and all that type of stuff. But the reality is, we need to house people in the rented sector and the social housing sector, so they are going to be moved, whether it's HMOs. I think with regard to qualifying who those people are, I think there needs to be a much bigger job, and there should be some much methodical checks that are put in place, because that's really important.
So the hotel you'll be boxing in is normally still closed?
Yes, it's been closed. So we have we're in downstairs in the banqueting suite, and upstairs for 5 years it's been closed. Wow. It's a Holiday Inn, so you know, there's lots of providers, because you know, whether it's franchise or your hotel owner, you know, you get decent rates. The government are, you know, I mean, it all comes down to obviously housing shortage and so forth. But of course, we have, as I've said before, you know, we have 68 million people living on this island.
Yep.
And it's growing. Something obviously.
A lot of people listening to this, by the way, Paul, just a slight tangent here, will be thinking, hang on, Paul's a property expert, he keeps talking about boxing. What's going on? You box, don't you?
I do, but I've done 5 or 6 fights, white collar fights.
But Spencer Oliver says hello, by the way.
Spencer, I love Spencer.
Yeah,
Spencer used to train me.
He told me. In fact, his words were, Champagne would be nothing without me.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go there.
He didn't say that.
One story.
He didn't say that, by the way.
I've had one bloody nose, and that was from Spencer during training. He caught me on the nose. But he was a European bantamweight champion, so I'll take having a bloody nose.
Absolutely. He's now, of course, at talkSport.
I know, he's next door.
A lot of punditry with talkSport.
Should I go next door and start talking about boxing?
Every time I see him in the office, he asks me about you.
You are lying.
No, I'm not. He says to me, he's
a Barnet boy as well.
He's a Barnet boy.
Yes,
and I said to him, I said, you know, he's boxing in a couple of weeks. He said, is that the Holiday Inn? And I said, yeah. He does that.
Yeah, I've known Spencer for years.
Forever and ever.
Top bloke.
So that's why the boxing chorus. So in addition, and you do it for charity.
We do it for Centre Point. And I would just say that one of our companies, My Deposits, through the tenants' generosity, we've raised this year £270,000, which has just been amazing. And Centre Point's a really good charity, helping 16 to 24-year-olds. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's not always sport that you're interested in.
No, of course not.
You also follow Spurs.
I don't know why I came in today.
I did.
but while we were away,
which are on the peripheries,
we won a trophy. I sent you the text from Bilbao.
You sent me a text, and you sent me an image of you. We obviously wouldn't be able to play the image of what you said, but it was very, very funny.
It was emotional.
Very emotional. Let's move to this one. Give landlords back tax relief to ease the housing crisis. This is something that you're kind of urging, but is it going to go anywhere, Paul? And what's the story?
Well, look. The reality is, I don't think it will go any further. I wrote an article on our website, Landlord Zone. Look, the reality is, there's been lots of landlords leaving the sector, and in 2017, George Osborne brought this taxation in where he abolished mortgage interest relief. So if you've got an interest-only mortgage and you're a landlord, you can't offset that as a disbursement. So landlords, if interest-only mortgages get taxed on turnover rather than profit. So let me give you an example. Imagine being a shop owner, and you're taking all these takings, but you can't offset your stock or your wages or your rent. That's the equivalent of what landlords are having to do. Realistically, up to 2024, the Treasury got £6.3 billion in mortgage interest relief, and they got a massive amount of £11 billion because of the additional 3% stamp duty. What I'm saying is, because of tenant security and keeping landlords in the sector, I'm saying that they should incentivise landlords, because don't forget, with all these costs, the biggest losers are tenants, because you put the rents up.
100%.
And they're the biggest loser. Or if a landlord sells up and they ask the tenant to leave, where does the tenant go? Because they've been paying more rent. So I'm saying, let the tenants stay in the property, keep the landlords in the sector, let them rent out as long as possible, and give some sort of tax incentive for a landlord to be a landlord for as long as possible, which helps the tenant.
Of course. Whenever you come on, Paul, we always get loads of questions for you as well. Leanne in Cardiff says, could the government's use of private rental for asylum seekers push up rents and reduce availability for locals?
I think that is an issue. I think it is an issue. It's an issue now. Like I said, I think the average now is 16 tenants to one property. Every area of the UK is completely different.
Sure.
You have HMO, house and multiple occupation, where a lot of those are being filled up by people on lower income. I think people on lower income will be priced out. I think the reality is that, yes, that could happen, without a doubt.
Kenny in Liverpool, is Serco's 5-year rent guarantee for asylum housing better than what most private tenants can get right now?
The reality is, it's about time and aggravation and compliance, and worried about rent arrears and void periods and having a repairing lease. Like I said, like with Elliot Lee, they're doing a repairing lease. So when you get the property back, you get it back in the same state. So it's about taking a view. Most landlords don't put a price on their time, and the reality is, I did a talk on Friday to 1,300 letting agents at the XL for Property Mark, and I said to letting agents, landlords need you more than ever, but landlords don't put a price on their time, because at the end of the day, it is now a profession, it's a job, and lots of landlords don't realise that, and that's where they trip up, or they don't give a better service.
Here's another story, Paul. Politicians want tenants to do repairs and then charge landlords. This is Glasgow Council, I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a red herring of a headline.
Yeah.
It's a freeholder.
Okay.
So it's not a normal landlord. So basically, you've got there's a big issue in the industry, and there's a lot of reform with regard to the Leasehold and the Freehold Act and the abolishment of ground rents, and they are quite archaic.
Yeah.
You know, and if you think about a lot of this changed because of Grenfell and obviously the cladding, where people are stuck in properties getting massive bills for buildings and fixes. This is an issue where in Scotland there's a building. And the common parts, because it's a flat, and the common parts, reception, in the hallways, reception, whatever, they've gone really to really bad state.
Yeah.
And you have absent freeholders that don't manage it properly, and that's an issue. So it's not like a normal landlord that's not carrying out the repairs. But yeah, there needs to be most definitely loads more enforcement. And I actually think this is quite a good initiative, which this this campaigning group are doing.
Yeah, that sounds good, doesn't it? Because we know lots of people, and service charges and the like is a whole other issue, isn't it? People,
well, it is.
People who once paid 20 quid a year are now being asked for about 14 grand a year.
Well, I know of a block in Bow in East London down the road, and the service charges were about 400 quid a month.
Yeah.
On top of a mortgage, when the mortgage rate's on it, it's really expensive. And if you're doing that, you expect a good service.
Of course you do.
And the problem you've got with the industry with regard to freeholders, I'm not saying all of that, is transparency, where there's been overcharging, they've been ripping off leaseholders and tenants.
Completely.
And
it's just become
overcharging for gardening, and also with regard to insurance. I've got a flat abroad in Spain and whatever. I paid €200 a month.
Yeah.
And it's been like that for a long time. But I mean, but there is overcharging, and it is an issue, especially if you get involved.
And it also means the owners are sort of making on the property in perpetuity, aren't they? Because you buy it you as the owner, and then you sell off the flats, and then you go, do you know, I'm going to carry on making money on this forever.
Well,
and everyone's paying £5,000-6,000 a month in 20 odd flats. You're doing all right.
Well, you can earn money out the builder, you can earn money out the insurance.
Of course you can.
There's lots of ways. So there needs to be a lot more transparency, and I think the industry and the government, and it is cross-parliament party, whereby it was Conservatives, now it's Labour. They are looking at enforcement, and it is all about the consumer and people not being ripped off.
On that point, Rachel in Glasgow says, can tenants legally fix things like broken windows or boilers and then charge the landlord back for it?
Yeah, so repairs isn't a big issue.
Yeah.
So, with the renters' rights bills coming in, Scotland have got different legislation, but at the end of the day, the biggest complaint about a landlord is landlords not carrying out repairs, or carrying out repairs within a certain time. And they brought in England with regard to Awab's law and that poor little boy that died in 2022. Quite rightly, landlords have a duty of care, and there is a tenancy agreement. And if the landlords don't carry out the repairs, yes, legally you still have to carry out the rent. But if I was a tenant and I've requested on numerous occasions to fix the boiler,
you'd have to do that first, wouldn't you? You'd have to say you
put it in writing. You have content. If they don't do it and you have to carry it out, well, then the reality is you'll just knock it off the rent.
Yeah.
Decent, reasonable landlords have a duty of care.
I had a great landlord in Bromley, Pete. I don't know if Pete is listening or watching now, but he used to say to me, whatever you need.
Didn't he try to evict you for antisocial behaviour?
That was a whole other story.
Oh, right,
and that's how we first met on that TV show.
Nightmare tenant, slum landlord.
There it is.
Boom, boom.
No, Pete would go, I'd say, Pete, I think we might need some new carpets. He'd go, all right, just order them, I'll pay for them.
Yeah, well, not every landlord's like that.
I had new radiators. I said, the heating's a bit wonky, and he went, in fact, the heating was a radiator. Yeah, we'll get the old rads done. He'd decorate it, bought me a Labrador. No, he didn't do that.
But I'll tell you where your demands went a bit OTT, when you asked for a mirror on the ceiling. Ian.
Listen, I thought it was a perfectly normal request. I thought that was standard stuff.
That's standard in an AST tenancy agreement.
Yeah, single man in South London. What do you do? Finn knows all about that.
Yeah, I know.
So, final story here. Interesting one. Over 500,000 homes to be built through the new National Housing Bank. What is the new National Housing Bank, and can they build 500,000 homes?
Well, that's the big question mark.
Yep.
The initiative's great. So the National Housing Bank is part of Homes England. The government have set aside billions of pounds, £16 billion in financial capacity, of which they're also trying to raise £53 billion in private investment to build 500,000 affordable properties, because we have a massive shortage of social housing. So I presume this 500,000 quota is going to come out of the 1.5, and now it's 1.3.
So they're promising 1.5 over this government.
Well, it went down to 1.3.
Oh, did they revise it?
They revised it about 3 weeks later.
Oh, did they? So it's 1.3
It's 1.3.
Okay,
but
this
you know
is
what?
nearly half of it then.
It is, but it's about joined up thinking with regard to local government, with local authorities, them having more powers with regard to local mayors.
Yeah.
They're obviously releasing, and really trying to reform the planning. I think the initiatives are great.
Yep.
The reality is always different, unfortunately.
You've got materials apart from anything else.
Well, you've got materials, you've got workmen. You know, I've tried to have an estimate done on my roofing. I've called 3 different roofers that I've known for ages, and you've got more chance of
But to be fair, that's because once they realise where it is and whose house it is.
Well, yeah, Bishop's Avenue is quite a big roof, unfortunately, as you well know.
Final one from Nicola. On the housing bank story, what kind of homes will National Housing Bank prioritise? Affordable flats, family homes, or big new estates?
I think it will just be a mixture of everything and anywhere, really. So really, the reality is and we've talked about this plenty of times. Not in your, not in your backyard. The NIMBYs. You are going to see, and they've said this all along, we've talked about this, they're going to want small little towns popping up everywhere.
Sure.
They're going to be looking on Greenbelt, and Grey Belt and Brown Belt and all that type of stuff. So we need housing, it's quite clear. There needs to be some radical reform, but you need loads of people to enforce it and carry it out, which is obviously planning officers, builders, carpenters, the list goes on. But we wait and see. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this in the future.
We will. We're out of time, Paul. Anything you need to tell us or promote or anything?
No, not really. I mean, I've got a YouTube channel, which
you have got a YouTube
Paul Champlain, A Talking Property.
Paul Champlain, A Talking Property.
Yeah, so
check that out.
Just talking about stuff, but yeah, just going up and down the country trying to educate the masses
on this area, which has never been as prominent and as high profile as it is at the moment. Paul, great to see you. Paul Champlain with us on the programme, founder of Landlord Action, friend of this show, of course, and he'll be back again in a few weeks' time. More comment from you on the way. Jeremy Kyle will be in as well before the news at 4. Keep it here. It's Talk.
It won't surprise you to hear that I agree with everything that Nigel Farage said there. And I think for me, the key thing that I want to hear from this government is that they will commit to delivering this inquiry and publishing the report before the next election, so that voters actually have a chance to decide who was to blame and whether they actually want to frankly exercise the only power they have, which is at the ballot box, to punish those people.
Across the UK UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
It's coming up on 5 to 4. Let's go straight to your calls. Jane is in Milton Keynes. Jane, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
I was listening to the foster carer earlier on, and I wanted to back up everything she said. Right. So we've fostered for 16 years, and mainly we had teenage girls in. One in particular was 12 years old when she came to us, and the first night she slept all night. The second night she went out after tea and she didn't come back, and the police brought her back in the early hours. Third night she did the same thing again. She had a tea and then she legged it, but she had a man. There were two men in a car that would come and pick her up, and she would contact them by phone, and they would take her off. We don't know where she went, but anyway, the police brought her back the third night, and I took her phone away from her. And the police, he sat with her for about half an hour talking to her, persuading her what she was doing was wrong, and told me I'd got to give her phone back. And I said, well, I'm not giving her a phone back, because that's how she contacts these men, you see. Yeah. And he said, no, you give her a phone back. I'm telling you, you've got to do it. So I was forced to give her the phone back. Within half an hour of him leaving, she'd gone again. This was at 3 o'clock in the morning. So she told me that they would go down to the railway station where the barriers lift at 5 o'clock, and that they would go off to London. It didn't cost them anything.
So they were going off from Milton Keynes, your neck of the woods, into, I know it's not the longest journey, but when you're 12, it is. So into the night, they would go. And where were they going, Jane? What were they doing?
We never found out, but that was the last night we saw her. They couldn't find her after that, but she eventually came back in and went to another carer. Yeah. But she did the rounds in Milton Keynes.
Wow. And so this was a kid, obviously, at 12. You're still a kid.
12-year-old.
She was, you know, feeding into everything we're talking about here about grooming gangs. Your sense is that she was somehow involved in that area.
Yeah.
Wow. What kind of girl was she on the face of it? I mean, when you'd sit and have your tea, was she a nice girl?
Yeah, she was. I can't say too much about her because they would instantly recognise who she is.
Of course.
But I got on quite well with her for the little while I was with her.
Yeah.
But we were asked a few times to have her back again, but I thought, because we'd got babies in as well, and I couldn't be up all night.
No, of course you couldn't.
With a
that's not fair on anyone. But was this a girl that was quite obviously troubled, despite the fact that she...
very. Yeah, very.
Do you get to hear much about the background of a child when you foster them?
We were told a few bits and pieces about her, but they don't tell you anything that they think is going to put you off taking them in.
No, of course.
So you don't find out the difficult stuff until they're actually inside your door.
Wow. Jane, I mean, fair play to you for being in that position. I know that there's never enough foster carers out there, and finding the right ones and dedicated ones. And I guess they're the sort of stories that once in a while you stumble across but never forget. Jane, thank you for your call. I mean, that's a 12. Imagine a 12-year-old. That's like almost the age of my little boy. Going out into London on your own, doing your own thing. No restraints. I can't imagine it. I mean, looking back to being 12 myself, I hardly knew what an ear-hole was when I was 12, let alone anything else. So, and the thought of having a drink at 12. You were an innocent 12-year-old, Jeremy Kyle.
I don't think I was innocent. Actually, on the same level, actually, me being serious for once, we've got a talk exclusive at 6 o'clock. I mean, I've talked about this grooming gang's disaster, these heinous, horrible crimes, as a father. We've actually got a talk exclusive. My daughter was groomed, raped and died from a drug addiction. We've got a